So, today will be about direct democracy, and mixed up, at the same time, I will explain the rules of the game and answer the most common questions. Well, at the end of this report, it will be possible to talk about the issues that arose during it and less common. In general, with direct democracy, in contrast to this optimal economy, the situation is somewhat different. Well, first of all, it belongs to another area, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that I also have formulas about direct democracy, but they are so extensive that it is simply unrealistic to show them on the screen, read them out loud. Therefore, anyone who is interested in the mathematical, or rather probabilistic side of the question, please read the articles. Links to these articles will be right under the video. If someone has not read it, I highly recommend it, and I would like to make a reservation right away. In other words, they often tell me about these articles, but you have some kind of wrong model there, some wrong conclusions. It's all very cool, but I have at least some kind of model, yes, and at least some calculations, or at least some statistics, which, let it be numerical modeling, but it is still collected. And those who object to these articles, accordingly, there are no models, there are no formulas either. There are only some speculative considerations. And here it's like such a strange situation. In other words, people respond to formulas and models with some guesses. And on this occasion, I have one universal answer. Well, dudes, if I did it wrong, do it right. Make a numerical model that will show that everything is wrong. You see the correct formulas, which will also show that everything is wrong. And then, we can discuss them in detail, where you have it wrong, and where I have it wrong, which model is closer to reality and all that. And without that, well, I'm sorry, it's like coming to a physicist and saying, and you know, it seems to me, that the universe is arranged differently. I really don't have formulas, I haven't conducted experiments, but it just seems that way to you. So I'm right, but you're like, they're right. But this conversation is completely stupid. That is, about some considerations about justice. Yes, it is possible without formulas, because these are some kind of targets. They are different for different people. Ethics for different people are also different. Well, the truth is not as different as it is commonly thought about, but still different. And then yes, here you can do it like this on your fingers. And as for formulas, well, sorry, mathematics and probability theory. This is mathematics and probability theory. They are discussed with formulas, or at least with some kind of numerical models. But nevertheless, yes, there will be practically no mathematics in this report. She's all over those articles. And the report will be about the device, about some nuances, and in fact, about those things that people most often do not understand. But in this very device, which, by the way, makes their idea of direct democracy extremely wrong. Maybe they are really talking about some kind of direct democracy, but clearly not about the one I mean. And accordingly, their objections also relate to something that I do not mean the models that they condemn, but maybe they are really worthy of condemnation. But we are talking specifically about this model, which will be discussed now. And actually, this model is based on fairly simple principles, which I conditionally call the rules of the game. There are actually only two such large and global ones. The first rule is that all decisions are made by those people who will be affected by the results of this decision. Not some others. Yes, these are the ones that will be affected by the results, and all of them. The second rule is one person, one vote, and nothing else. One person is about those people from the first point, that is, any person who will be affected by the decision. Since these rules are key, it probably makes sense to describe each of them in more detail separately. So, the first rule, right? The decision is made only by those people who will be affected by its results. There are two considerations about the appearance of this rule. The first is a kind of consideration of justice, but it's just extremely strange when someone decides for someone who doesn't care about the result at all. Maybe he cares very much about those for whom he makes a decision, but it's still extremely strange, because if they are not satisfied with it, and they did not accept it, they will tell him that he does not suit them, and he can always mentally answer them, and what about me? Go do it. I don't suffer from this decision. There are a lot of such examples in the world. There, the monarch lives in our palace, and the population lives in huts. And accordingly, the decisions that the monarch makes, they concern both the palace and the huts, but only the palace concerns him. And what is there in the huts, he does not care at all. At the same time, those who live in huts are very worried about how these huts are arranged, how good they are, what is happening around these huts, and so on and so on. That is, this is the second point. This is no longer a consideration of justice, but, let's say, a kind of social phenomenon that pushes us to exactly this option as the most effective. They have a very good motivation to make these decisions and take them not anyhow, but based on their own benefits. Of course, they can also think about others at the same time, and normal people do so. In other words, they are also worried about what's going on with a neighbor, a friend, maybe even a stranger. But this also applies to them. In other words, their motivation is much stronger. And due to the fact that they have much stronger motivation, firstly, they will not make a decision that is obviously harmful for them. And secondly, they will probably think better about this decision, because it depends on how they will live. And thirdly, even if they don't guess, they will notice it very quickly, because it affects their lives. They don't have to wait for reports from some special people who will tell them, and there the people are suffering, the people are dissatisfied, and they are this people who are dissatisfied. And they themselves, in general, say it instantly. They don't even need to open their mouths for this, just mentally once and said. Accordingly, they notice this and have a very bad motivation to apply a bad solution to some much more successful one. And in fact, this very first rule follows from this. And for reasons of fairness, for reasons of expediency, decisions should be made by those who are affected by its results. You can ask questions about this. It's really being asked, and how do you know if the results affect these people or not? Who exactly makes these decisions? Is there any criterion? Here, as usual, there is no explicit criterion in social processes. In other words, it is impossible from the outside to somehow write down in advance who makes what decisions. What should I do then? We must remember that we have a direct democracy, and all decisions in a direct democracy are made with the help of direct democracy. And this is also a solution. To whom this or that area belongs. That is how it looks technically. At some point, people gather in a large group, the whole country, the whole world, depending on how widespread this direct democracy is in our country, and make decisions of the kind to whom certain decisions relate. That is, some more general level takes, for a more particular one. Residents of the country, for example, determine which decisions relate to regions, which decisions, maybe, relate to cities. It is also possible to decide at the regional level which decisions relate to cities and which to regions. But this decision is not made for any particular group of people, that is, not for any particular city, but for all cities in this region, or this country, or the whole world. In a city, or in a region, or in a country, they can make a decision about what decisions relate there to the block, to the house, almost to the entrance. That is, from a more general level, where almost all citizens are gathered, that is, everyone who, in principle, can make a decision on at least some issue. And these same citizens, they decide how to divide it into smaller levels. After they have studied it, they make these decisions. Again, you can make a mistake here, but nothing prevents them from changing their mind. It will turn out that it is inconvenient to make any decisions at the city level, at the regional level. Well, all right, I voted again. There was a majority. This decision will be made at the regional level. In the opposite direction, it works exactly the same way. We thought, why do we make these decisions at the regional level, at the city level? It is somehow more logical. But okay, most of them have gathered. Now they make these decisions at the regional level. That is, there is no mystery here. We use direct democracy to determine which group makes which decisions in principle. And we don't need to look for any, well, absolutely objective factors. It is enough that most people agree with this version. It seems to them correct and convenient. Here we can say, and I emphasize, this is my guess, my assumption, but it seems to me, for a number of reasons, that with this approach, there will be a tendency towards decentralization, not centralization. In other words, more and more solutions will move to the lowest levels. Why do I think so? But first of all, because it's the most convenient way. In other words, a lot of decisions are made by those people who see firsthand how it is now. Accordingly, it is very difficult to notice this from a higher level. This, of course, intersects in principle with the first rule. Yes, well, I live in Moscow, for example, and it's very hard for me to guess, and they're in Rostov or somewhere in Tula, how they have it there. What is bothering them there at the moment, what they would like. And it's probably just as hard for them to guess about Moscow. If they don't come here all the time, then well, Figs knows what's going on there. At best, they've seen it somewhere on YouTube. And accordingly, there are solutions that really concern everyone, but these are some major projects. I do not know if there is a ship to launch to Mars or some transport tasks of exactly this interregional significance. That is, there are railways, aviation, something like that. Maybe there are bus services between cities. It is clear that it is more convenient to do this at some large level. There are also things of the same kind. Well, I do not know how to build a network of power plants there. This is also a decision that concerns, well, the whole country, maybe the whole world. But there are quite a few such solutions. That is, most of the solutions are not like that. A lot of solutions are like what color, I do not know where to paint the fence, at which points to place stores. Here, at the general level, as a maximum, it is possible to discuss algorithms with which you can write a program that will somehow optimally place these stores. Well, really, of course, if there is no such program, and we are interested in some separate case, some separate store, the locals know better where to place it, and where it will help, and not interfere. The second point, respectively, is one person, one vote. And why do I insist on it all the time? Because there is some kind of tendency among many people, but in my opinion, this is a consequence of some kind of elitist thinking. Yes, everyone thinks to himself that he is smarter than others, or thinks that there are some individual people who are smarter than others. At the same time, everyone has their own set, but everyone will name such people. And it seems to them that it would be best to let these people decide. Because they are smarter, they will decide better. But here's the problem. Just because it seems to me that someone is smarter, it doesn't mean that it is. No matter how confident I am in my ability to evaluate someone's mind, I may be mistaken. And moreover, another person can refute me. He can refute at the level of intuition, that is say, but it doesn't seem to me. Or it can refute on the basis of facts. That is to say, well, look, I found his articles, that's the same nonsense. I'll read it. I'll say, yes, such nonsense. And before that, I hadn't read them. Everything would be fine with this option, that is, let's give the right to make a decision to the smartest people, even if we choose them there somehow. But the problem is that we have no way to objectively find out if a person is the smartest. Moreover, we have no way of knowing whether he is well-intentioned towards us. Because it is quite possible that he thinks very well about it in the topic, but this does not mean that he has the same goals in this topic as we do. Perhaps they are the exact opposite. He wants, for example, to enrich himself personally, and the fact that we will suffer from this. Well, yes, he can suffer a little with his conscience, but somehow he will survive. Due to the fact that we do not have this universal tool for determining the mind, we, accordingly, cannot objectively say which people are the smartest. If we take this case by vote, and in fact, why not immediately take a decision by voting? Why are we delegating it? But I'll talk about this a little later. But for now I'll clarify, if we had some kind of objective force, yes, contact with the universal information field, which would tell us which people are the smartest. And this model could be considered. It violates justice in a sense, but at least it has expediency. But alas, it so happened that this decision is made not by the universal information field, but by people. And there is no contact with the universal information field. And if there was one, there is also an interesting question here. Or maybe we should not ask him about smart people, but immediately answers to burning questions. Maybe let it make a decision then. That is, as it is not more likely, but there is some kind of logical inconsistency here. If we say that these smart people will be chosen by other smart people, we get a closed logical circle. That is, in fact, they choose themselves. If you think that there will be smart people there from the very beginning and they will never give up, then you are very wrong. There is a high probability that there will not be smart people there even from the very beginning, but there will be cunning ones, or there will be those who accidentally got there. In fact, they do not know how to evaluate the mind of others and who he will take into his composition there. And this is a big question. Maybe like fools who are even worse than average. In any case, this is a closed logical circle from which there is no way out. And we have just a whole bunch of examples for such situations when we have a commission that can select someone from its composition. And we assume that this commission will have the best, and for some reason there will be the worst. Why? Well, a system that is built on the principle of captation, that is, the choice of new members in its composition, it inevitably degrades. Perhaps even at the first step, that is, from the very beginning, these first ones were not the smartest and like, oh, well, the next one, they can recruit even bigger fools. And moreover, even if we are lucky, and there are really smart people there first, there is a chance that they will make a mistake and take on someone who is not very smart. If we believe that most people in society are idiots, but only in this state does it make sense for us to delegate all this to the smart ones for some reason. So, if there are only idiots in society, the probability that an idiot will come to them as a candidate is very high. And the probability of error is also not zero. That is, idiots mostly come to them. The probability of error, even if small, but it still exists. And it is quite possible that it is more likely that the idiots will take them next, simply due to the fact that there are a lot of them coming. They will make a mistake on one of them and take it. It can be math. Check the models. I haven't finished writing it, but yes, there is a certain correlation between probabilities there. Well, that is, the probability that an idiot will come, namely their share in society there, and the probability of an error, in which the system degenerates very quickly. Perhaps there is some kind of ratio at which it turns out to be stable on the contrary, but something I suspect is out of the realm of the improbable. They should never make mistakes at all, or society should not consist of idiots, and then the very meaning of the system of scaptation disappears. In general, there are a lot of logical inconsistencies, and in principle, contradictions already at the level of interpersonal relations. Because Ivanov will say that let's let Petrov, as the smartest, select the next specialists. And Vazekin will say, and I don't think Petrov is smart, let him not select it, but someone else will call his last name. Yes, you can choose them by a majority of votes, but a lot of people will be unhappy. They will say that they chose the wrong ones. A more gentle version of the same, it is usually voiced as okay, let everyone make decisions. But the voices will have different weights. The first logical inconsistency is obvious, and who sets the weights? Some specialists again. But, see point 1. Unsolvable logical circle. Self-enclosed reasoning. Okay, we're going to have some sort of system to decide. Well, I haven't seen any programs that could make such decisions. So far, only people are coping. If we write one, someone will come up with a way. Yes, we can discuss it. But so far, there is no such thing, and it is not expected. Somehow, according to the results, by guessing, well, sorry, there are random processes here. You can read a series of articles Counterintuitive Eagle, which shows how, on a large sample, completely random processes lead to the eeriest stratification. That is, some have everything, others have nothing. But with Libra, it may well turn out the same way, and this will not be the merit of a particular person. Here's the whole interesting thing about this process. It simply consists of a checkmate. Models, yes, we are all absolutely equal. We know that for sure. That is, they are just throwing a coin in fact. But for purely statistical reasons, even so, there is a huge stratification. And here it will also arise. That is, a lot of people will have a very high weight, and this will be due to nothing but luck. None of their talents, not their ability to guess, but luck and only luck. How to distinguish them from those who, thanks to their talent, have raised their weight is unknown. And again, it's not a fact that there is such a way at all. But he's not there yet, so again, what can I say? If they appear, then we will discuss how appropriate it is. Further, if we have someone with high weights, someone with low, he can immediately start using it. That is, let me, as a person with high weights, I will also increase the weight of my friends, regardless of their talents. But simply because they are my friends, or maybe we have common interests there with them, it will be more convenient for us to achieve them. And I will lower them to my opponents, or just random people. That is, that stage got up first. Whoever was the first to have increased weights, he usurped all the power for himself. In other words, it seems that this is still a democracy, but in fact, it has not been a democracy for a long time, because a small group of people have 80% of the votes, and everyone else has the remaining 20. But this is if we renormalize the weights so that they add up to 1. Then it turns out that 0 as many as 8/10 for a small group, 0 as many as 2/10 for everyone else. The usurpation of power, directed democracy ended there. This is probably even worse than representative democracy, at least in those countries in which it more or less works. Finally, it turns out that not only did some random people who were just lucky get into this group, a group of people with elevated weights. Those who are engaged in self-promotion also have an advantage for getting into it. Yes, and not everyone may believe, but someone will believe them. In other words, it will turn out that a person who talks a lot about himself is a smart and wonderful coin. He gets a voice boost through some other people because they believe him. And those people who may be very good at guessing, but are engaged in something else, for example, there is research or programming of some devices or something else. Well, to build a spaceship, I don't know. They have nowhere to do it. Their voice weight is not growing. The question is, do we want to give such preferences to those who present themselves best? In a sense, there is a reservation in favor of this option, and not against it, right? In a sense, it really turns out that, if a person has come up with something very cool, and he will have to learn how to present this case anyway. That is, he must somehow convey this to others, somehow he must tell them this matter. It is desirable that they understand and get into it. That is, in any case, this skill is useful. But when a person proves this very decision to others, even if it's good, and they vote themselves at the same time, and he votes only with his one vote, people have a much stronger coupling between arguments and the result. That is, according to the result, they understand that the arguments were wrong. Here we have a kind of gap. In other words, a person promotes himself in one area, but uses these voices in a completely different one. People do not see a very successful result, but it is difficult for them to correlate it with the on other issues, for which they raised the weight of the voice to this person. That is, in principle, this skill is cool. But, if we try to use it to improve the system, we actually worsen it. In other words, the introduction of weights in this regard worsens the situation, not improves it. And here another consideration arises. For some reason, a lot of people think that if we have a direct democracy, and everyone votes with one vote, then no one voting can listen to anyone else. If our specialists do not make decisions, then that's it. No one consults them anywhere. No one listens to them at all. They do not give arguments themselves. That is, what suddenly? Specialists are not going anywhere. Yes, we cannot objectively say who is an expert and who is pretending, but if it seems to me that this is the expert, I can quite listen to his arguments before my vote. Moreover, even if I ignored his arguments, voted not as he recommended, I then see the result. I think that the result is bad. Maybe it's not worth taking a closer look at his arguments after all. Maybe he was right after all. That is, the specialist is not going anywhere. Moreover, this one will be discussed further, but I'll get ahead of myself a little bit. I can, in principle, delegate a vote to him on this issue, and I just don't vote myself. This does not mean that I gave him my voice, or increased his weight. No, I can change my mind at any time, and start voting on this issue myself again. I'm not giving him the case forever, for a while, but nevertheless I have such an opportunity. And in principle, people who are worried about the fact that they do not understand some issue there. But experts would understand it, but there is no question. And you think that this is the specialist. Well, all right. You appoint him as your delegate on these issues, but you do not vote. You still have this opportunity. The opportunity to take this case away from you forever disappears. Wow, she's not here. But this possibility is not even positive at all. It is negative. In other words, the important point is that we cannot, in a direct democracy, take away someone's right to vote on some topic, but he himself has the right not to vote on it. In other words, he can abstain, he can appoint a delegate, he can vote the way someone recommended him. It's his right. Exactly the same as his right to vote. It's not clear what the problem is. If I suspect that the real problem is that people are afraid that some other people will vote themselves. In other words, they would like those people to give their voice to someone they personally consider a specialist. In other words, this alleged concern and expediency actually mask the desire to usurp power in their favor. And accordingly, talk about how a mega-smart dictator will come there and sort everything out. For some reason, a person thinks that the dictator who came to power will completely agree with him in everything. Well, because he's smart, and he understood everything correctly, and all his desires are the most objective. It's the others who are wrong, but he's not wrong. And the dictator, who is also smart and fair, will naturally be one-on-one with him on all issues. It is clear that this will not happen. In itself, if you think about it, this is not a very convincing excuse. In fact, some person just says to me, "Let's give your right to someone else, just because it will be more convenient for me." Well, in general, I've come up with a great idea of what I can say. But let's do the opposite. But nevertheless, yes, it's all connected with the question, but how can non-specialists make decisions at all? Well, in any case, despite the fact that I said that in my opinion, the background is usually like this, the desire to usurp power. People directly state another version that, they say, experts understand the topic. I have already said about specialists, that in fact, we have no way to distinguish a specialist from a charlatan. Well, such a mega objective, right? We will still rely only on what we think. But nevertheless, these specialists understand, who have the universal information field assigned, but ordinary people do not understand. And he cites someone as an example, but is there, I do not know, Vasily from the next entrance can compare with Einstein. And here, there is another important nuance. Vasily may not be comparable to Einstein in the field of physical research. And they have different tasks. Because Einstein, or any other scientist, he explores a field of science that has not yet been explored. That is, he has nowhere to peak. He is a pioneer there, but in reality there are still some pioneers there with him, and they spy on each other. But nevertheless, yes, there are few of them, and no one really knows the answers yet. And when we make a decision, we know a lot of answers. Finding a solution is much harder than understanding a ready-made one. For example, there are some ways to solve equations. Humanity, I do not know, 3,000 or 4,000 years and a rock, before there was this very record that we know from school, and the very methods that we know from school. But mind you, people have been looking for them for 4,000 years, and we passed them in school, and almost everyone understood it, right? Well, at the simplest level, at least the equations have learned to solve everything. It is much easier to understand a ready-made solution than to find this solution. Moreover, sometimes it is not even necessary to thoroughly understand every nuance in order to make a decision, because there are always some people who are ready to give their thoughts, their arguments. Yes, you didn't understand some paragraphs in their narration, but the bulk of the arguments are even easier to understand than all the paragraphs. In other words, this is a task of a completely different order. Develop something, invent something, and understand what is already ready. Choose between ready-made options, especially when someone wrote you this text. In other words, it is easier to write a text than to open something, and it is even easier to understand a text than to write it, and much easier than to open it. And really, most of the things that humanity knows, they are not particularly difficult to understand. It's difficult to find them, yes, it takes a lot of training there, for decades, in order to understand the finished but damn sorry, Look at any tutorial. You think they're telling you about programming or something else, I don't know, about three-dimensional graphics, about special effects. Well, I'm listing things that I often watch myself, right? Do you think they tell you only some of the simplest things there, but really there is something complicated behind them, inaccessible to understanding? No, it's all like that. There is just a lot of it. Yes, it will take you a lot of time to find out all this. You will need a lot of experience to add some more element to this much. But no, it's all at the level of human understanding. It doesn't even require some very long backstory. In other words, it's really possible to take the same mathematics. It may seem to someone that there is higher mathematics there. It is taught to people only in universities. This apparently means that it is not at all the way for a person to go through the entire school curriculum in mathematics at first. In other words, the school program is unsuccessful in many places, but there are still purely technical reasons for this. There are a lot of routes that we can draw along this tree of knowledge. At school, they choose one of these routes and follow it. But this does not mean that this is the shortest route to some node. If we set ourselves a goal to reach some node, well, they're to learn about the limits of something. And even there I do not know about integrals. The route it would take us 3 months. That is, if you purposefully go from zero in mathematics to integrals, it's 3 months. It's just that something else is going on at this time, some other topics. Well, plus, they are inefficiently passed, yes, but this is a separate issue. People who have not seen it all, they imagine this case exactly like this, that we, apparently, were not told this because it is so difficult that ordinary mortals will not understand. No, you can understand everything, and you don't have to be a mega genius. It takes a genius to come up with such a thing yourself. To understand no, and if we really have mega cool specialists in society, but actually, what prevents them from communicating their arguments to everyone under this system? Moreover, a specialist is useless if he cannot convey his arguments. He needs not only to discover something, but also to explain it to others. In other words, scientists spend a lot of time trying to explain what he discovered. If he does not know how to do it, but his discovery will sink into oblivion until the same thing is discovered by someone else who knows how to explain, or until someone else stumbles upon the department and gets through all this incomprehensible presentation and understands what was discussed there and popularizes this case. In other words, everything is completely normal here. There are experts. They will just give arguments. Another thing is that according to their arguments, people will decide whether it is true that it is a specialist or it is charlatans. But I say, there is no objective criterion, alas. Here, some have given arguments, others have given arguments. We need to figure out who has the right arguments, who really brought arguments, and who tried to confuse his head. People won't understand it right away, not 100 pounds at once. But no one understands it right away. There are a lot of quite official dictatorial organizations, and they are in exactly the same situation. I would even say that not everyone is. It's just that some people are particularly unlucky, and they generally accept complete nonsense. Well, someone put noodles on their ears. They believed him, and begin to implement Petric in the filter. Here's an example for you, please. Yes, there was also an element of drinking, but nevertheless, a lot of people, however, believed. Why? But the specialist is not some kind of sucker. If we think that, do as I said, this is the right option, that there is nothing to throw beads in front of a pig, we suddenly find out that it turns out to be a very profitable strategy, well, or tactic, to always say so. You just do it. It's still not clearer to you. It's more visible. Come on. And any idiot will be able to use such tactics to portray super mega specialists and push profitable options for him. Well, or even not profitable, but just those that he likes. Well, if we think this is a good option, why not use it? Everyone will start using it. Or do you think that only honest people will say that? Oh no. Honest people are just likely to try to explain. But this is the kind of bullshit that charlatans will be engaged in. They're doing it now, by the way. Please note, if you meet a real scientist, do not look that he is a scientist, and you are a schoolboy there. He will still try to explain to you. But any charlatan will start with the fact that you do not understand, you are not educated enough. There he is, the luminary, and there's nothing to talk about with you. One more thing, right? Why can't experts make a decision? Because the rules of the game state that no decision is final. It is slightly less important than the first two, but nevertheless, it is still very important. All decisions are temporary, in the sense that they can change at any moment. Not by themselves, not by throwing dice, but simply as soon as the majority decides that this option was bad, they will revote. Everyone will personally win another option, and it will be implemented. I will tell you more about this a little later, but now this is exactly this country. The questions are interesting. In other words, there is no need to be afraid that people will make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Do you think professional programmers write programs there without errors? No. They have programs that they take on. They are more complicated, and they therefore make as many mistakes as beginners. It's just that beginners allow them in a simple program, and specialists allow them to be complex. But nevertheless, I've never seen that the original draft of the program was docked there without changes until the final. At best, half will change, and it often happens that everything will change, and twice. Why, alas, everything is really difficult in research and inventive activity. Guessing the first time is very difficult. And most importantly, it's very hard to guess without starting to try. Before the samples, you have preliminary considerations. You start trying, and you realize, oh, you didn't guess it. You didn't guess it. This is an experimental study, in fact. Before setting up experiments, you can't know for sure which option is better, which option is correct. You can only assume that, and experience will, at best, give you a better option, but it is not guaranteed to be correct. Yes, not experts will not guess, but experts also do not guess. Here it turns out to be an important opportunity to change the decision at any time. Yes, do not pull the weight of the decision that was initially made on the wrong decision. Accordingly, as a consequence of this third, main, but slightly less than the first two rules, that the system should be arranged in such a way as to change your voice, in general, it was as simple as possible to change the decision. This is written directly into the design. In order to change your mind, well, to vote for another option, you don't even need to start a new vote. We need to go to the one that already exists, remove the check mark from one option, and put it on the other. That's it. In other words, there is no need for referendums, no preliminary vote collection. No. As soon as I changed my mind, I went to change it, due to the fact that people have motivation and, importantly, feedback, because the results apply to them. They also gain experience in decision-making. In other words, they have a direct connection between how they voted and what happened as a result. Like it or not, a person's brain will draw conclusions about this. And this is much easier for the brain than these deferred conclusions in a long chain of indirect influences. That is, when I went there 6 years ago, I voted for someone. 6 years have passed, and then 6 years later, he made some decision that I may not even know about, and everything went wrong. In other words, there is too much chain of events between these two phenomena, too long a period. It is very difficult for me to track how my voting for some person at that time affected the fact that my life is worse today. And here, it will be very easy for me to track it. Here, we have just accepted it. We have been observing it right these 3 months, right? And indeed something has worsened, and almost everyone remembers that we voted that way ourselves. Well, I voted myself to do so. That's done. That's turned out badly. In other words, it allows you to gain experience, allows you to improve in this matter. And even if for some reason you haven't gained experience yet, you need to fix it quickly. In addition, possible additions are also the right of all citizens. They can be some kind of group, it can be everyone voting by common consent, it can just be some kind of subgroup of voters who turned out to agree on this issue. They can hire some group, another, a commission, a specialist, anyone, and instruct him to understand the issue in more detail. First, describe the phenomenon itself. Secondly, to offer some options on what to do with this phenomenon. Describe the pros and cons of each option. Again, this is the right of everyone who is considered a specialist. Who can I trust? Who should I entrust this to? I note that this commission will not make a decision. She will only describe the phenomenon and give her recommendations. And there may even be a lot of these commissions in general. In other words, one group can hire many independent commissions, yes, in quotes, appoint them. And different groups can hire different groups, assign them. In other words, specialists can not only give advice at will, they may well be hired as employees. But I didn't like how they described the phenomenon, but it's not clear or weak arguments there. All right, they'll hire them next time. That is, they do not make decisions. No one is obliged to vote the way they recommended. But if someone wants to, they can vote like that. That is, both options are present here, but everyone chooses which option he personally will follow. Moreover, the same person can follow different options in different cases, but, in some topic, for example, he does not understand at all. There he will listen to the commission. This is his desire. I note, it was not imposed on him. It is his choice. Does he think it's the right thing to do? Well, he can do that. In another area, he believes that he understands better. There he can vote himself, not listen to the commission. Or, he can listen to the commission and still draw conclusions himself. That is, a bunch of options. Everything is possible. Everything is available. Well, in general, this is what concerned these two rules, although during this time, I managed to formulate the third rule and set out a lot of details on these rules. Now there is still such a technical country. This is not really a rule anymore. It is already closer to the algorithm of the system device. They often ask this question, and when will citizens have time to understand all these issues at all? That is, now it is clear, yes, with quotes, the dictatorship has specially appointed or selected people. They sit, they have such a profession, they sit, sort things out, make decisions. Ordinary citizens, they all work somewhere. At that moment, in order to make a decision, it is not at all necessary that all citizens vote. Some kind of quota must vote, and this is not necessarily the entire population. If we are dealing with the entire population of the country, and there are, I do not know, 150 million people, we can make the thieves a fairly low 5% there. Remembering that even when the decision has already been made, you can always change your mind. However, I would like to reduce the number of cases when, after all, a small group makes some not very good decision that does not suit a large group. Moreover, there are options for all sorts of manipulations, well, like there to distract the attention of a small group to vote. Yes, you won't hide it all in a bag for a long time. After a while, everyone will notice that some bad decision is in effect, and will cancel this decision and implement another option. But for some time, perhaps someone will have time to use their advantage to the disadvantage of everyone else about this bad decision. One could say here, but this is the civic duty of every person. He has to keep an eye on, and take part in all the votes all the time. That's where the ancient Greeks did it. And this is the right consideration. That is, in theory, it is desirable that everyone does so. But, direct democracy, it is directly related to freedom. And I've said here more than once that we don't force anyone to do anything specific. If a person wants to, he does it this way. If he doesn't want to, he does it this way. A bunch of options. In other words, I would like all people to consciously watch and participate in most decisions. But first of all, we understand that not everyone will do this. Secondly, someone does not want to. Thirdly, someone does not have any interests in some areas. And fourthly, however, some people may, for example, be very passionate about their work. And despite the fact that in the future, I think, the working day will be even shorter, well, that is, not even 8. There will be 4 hours, and there will be a lot of free time left. Well, it's a mandatory job, right? These 4 hours are mandatory working hours, and a person may well be passionate about his business, and he continues to do it during the time that is considered his free time. And he just has no time to track the decision on all issues. And then there is something that I have already referred to several times. Yes, here is the concept of these very delegates. Initially, this concept was peeped into the Soviet system, which was at the very dawn of the Soviet Union, and it appeared there not long before the revolution. Some existed before the revolution, some after the revolution. Then it turned into, well, an imitation organ. In other words, these tips really didn't solve anything anymore, but initially the idea was good. In other words, we have some kind of group, it is a source of power. And all such groups, for example, a working collective of some kind, they are also sources of power, but they all cannot come together. Now, by the way, it has become much easier, because then it was necessary to gather in person. But now you can at least sit on some website with 1 million people, and there are no problems, you don't have to physically go anywhere. But nevertheless, yes, these people, instead of going with the whole crowd, they chose a delegate from themselves, and sent this delegate to some higher level council. And this delegate was obliged to hold their point of view there. But they, in fact, chose the one who is most likely to carry out their point of view. In other words, it's not like he's in charge of them. It's them who are in charge of him. But this system has a lot of problems. One of them is the loss of representativeness. Well, because we have a group, there are different points of view in it. They chose a delegate by a majority vote, but he will push the majority point of view, and the minority point of view is lost. And so it happened in every team. That is, in reality. In society we have, for example, 60% for option A and 40% for option B. But in each council, option B simply did not get its delegate. And in the higher level council, we no longer have 40% of the delegates for option B, but at best there are 5. And even a level higher in the council, there are already 0 of them at all. That is, there are 40% in society, and there is 0. And if there are, for example, 3 options, it can be even worse. That is, in society, there are 35% for the winning option, for example, and, accordingly, 65% for the other 2. Just for each of them, less than for this, for the winner, but less, at least a little there, 2% less. So, we have a dropout at the first level. That is, there was 35% for the winning option. There are 75 or 80 of them in the first level council. That is, 35% of the population dictate the will, as it were, to the entire population. Moreover, it looks as if there is 100% agreement. Well, even in the second level council, almost 100% of delegates are really in favor of this option. This can be solved by sending 2 delegates there, but it's still not clear why all this should be done, unless we want to cosplay some historical events. There is a better option. Since our voting is purely electronic, we do not need to send anyone anywhere at all. Instead, he can, from among those who have the right to make a decision on this issue, name some and say, here they are my delegates on some topic, or on all topics in general. This is his right, yes. He can configure there in the interface. How does this delegate work? Well, what's the point, right? In the councils, it turned out that for technical reasons, you voted anyway as a delegate, and those who sent him, they could. Well, first of all, you must vote for this. And secondly, if he didn't do it anyway, they found out about it, they could recall him. But the problem is that they couldn't reconsider the decision there. It was necessary to start the dreary recall procedure there. Well, in general, we have a lot of problems. Yes, if the delegate did not vote the way these people wanted, then you will fix the figs. Representative democracy of the most common type is even worse now. In other words, we believe him when we vote for him. Then he does not justify our trust, he votes in a different way. And not only can we not reconsider the decision, we can't immediately withdraw it yet. We will recall him there at the next election. Well, we just won't vote for him, if we don't forget at all. Yes, what he did to us. But again, a very long distance, a huge ground for abuse, and so on. The situation is different here. In other words, the delegate does not take away the right to make a decision, and he does not take away the vote of this person. It works like this. If a person voted directly on some issue himself, then the voice of this person is taken into account. If he did not vote on this issue, but some of his delegates voted, the vote of this person is divided among his delegates who voted. If at some point a person then decides to vote himself, his share of the vote is withdrawn from these delegates, and the whole vote of this person is counted, since he himself voted. Well, similarly, if some delegate was added, here he is at time 1, he did not vote, at time 2 he voted on this issue. Respectively, the share of each of the delegates decreases, yes, so that he can provide the same share to this delegate. I note that these are always the votes of the one whose delegate this is. In other words, in total, it is always one vote, one person, one vote. It's just that the delegates divided this vote among themselves into smaller parts and disposed of it. What is good about this crushing, I'll tell you later. This also makes great sense. But the point here is that a person doesn't even need to recall delegates. In other words, he can do it. There is such an opportunity, and again for this, there is no need to wait for any elections, and there is no need to call a delegate there and tell him everything when returning from the council. Just uncheck the system and that's it. This guy is no longer his delegate. His vote will never go to this delegate in any way. But nevertheless, even if he recalled the delegate, he can immediately correct the situation. That is, if he was outraged by how the delegates voted for some decision, how they were distributed by his vote, he can at any time not only withdraw these delegates, he can say no himself, my vote goes for that option entirely. At any moment. This is very cool, in my opinion. Yes, it gives some confidence and makes it very difficult, well, a whole bunch of manipulations that politicians are now engaged in. Well, because really, it's one thing. Once he hung noodles on his ears before the elections, and then do what you want. And another thing is when you did what you want, and immediately you are no longer a delegate, and yet, this decision did not pass. That is, they instantly revised it. A very good way, in my opinion. But nevertheless, a little more details, yes, about how this thing with delegates is arranged, because it is important. On the one hand, it allows a person not to follow all the issues at all. On the other hand, it allows him to keep his finger on the pulse all the time. If he missed something, he can immediately connect, fix it. And on the third hand, it also solves the problem of making a decision of a small group of people. Why? Well, because when a person chooses delegates for himself, he will probably choose those with whom he most often votes the same way, at least in this area. The system can even help him show statistics there, the correlation between his votes and each of his individual delegates. If the correlation deviates greatly from one, the system may warn him that you check there, maybe it's not your delegate anymore, but as Zaslanets turned out to be. That is, most of the time, he has a very high correlation with the delegates in the voting. And due to this, even when he did not vote himself, his vote is almost entirely. But almost entirely, because sometimes, after all, one of the delegates may vote differently than this person himself. But nevertheless, almost entirely, almost always his vote goes for the option that he would have chosen himself. At the same time, he could not even read this decision. It's just a purely statistical effect. He missed the vote itself, but his vote went where he himself would have directed it. And so 3 in 1. In other words, we solved 3 whole problems with these very delegates, but not quite. Slightly more cunning delegates than it might seem. And here's another important point. Why are there more than one delegate? When an option similar to the council system was still being considered, the solution there was also that each group of people, it sends several delegates. This made it possible to maintain representativeness in that system. There was a tricky way of determining how to select these delegates. But in fact, it came down to the fact that the first delegate was determined by the majority, and the second delegate was determined, respectively, by the majority of their opponents. It's mathematically not very hard to do. In fact, everyone can list everyone he would like to see as his delegate. When we chose the first one, we believe that those who tick the box in front of him, among others, already have their own delegate, and we look at who doesn't have their own delegate, and accordingly, only their votes are taken into account to determine the second one, and so on. Yes, we go there until we introduce the whole group, as it were. Well, or almost the entire group, there for a very small percentage. By the way, this is also useful here, but not in making decisions, but in choosing, for example, some performers. That is, you can always do it like this. It is even more important not to choose performers, but supervisors. Well, in other words, I was talking about commissions that can advise people on some issues. And besides the consultant, there may be those who are instructed to go and see how the order is being fulfilled. Well, there is some kind of construction going on. Yes, let him see that it really goes there. And these people can be chosen according to the system outlined. But it is nevertheless somewhat worse than the current version. But what she has in common with him is that there are more than one delegates. Here it is done for the same purpose, in order to minimize the loss of representativeness. The problem is this. One delegate is unreliable for several reasons. First of all, he may not vote himself, but the person missed it, his delegate also missed it. Yes, usually there will be more active delegates, but this does not mean that they have 100 eyes and 1,000 ears there. They're going to miss something anyway. The probability of missing all 10 is much lower. At least one, but he will notice. The probability that 30 delegates will miss, but it is simply incomparably less. That is, almost always the voice of this person will leave, as already mentioned, almost entirely, for the option that he would have chosen himself. This is a question of representativeness, so that the voice is not lost. There is a second question. This is almost the whole thing. The delegate is not 100% the same person as the one who delegated his vote to him. That is, yes, they are similar, and their voting statistics are very much the same, and the correlation is almost 1. But it is unlikely that it is always 1. That is, on some issues, their opinion may differ. And it turns out that on this issue, the delegate voted for this person, not for the option for which that person would have given it himself, but for some other, perhaps even for the exact opposite. And then again, the same situation. If there are 10 or 30 delegates, the probability that all 30 on this issue will choose the opposite option is very low. That is, yes, 1, 2 maybe, but 28 others, they will choose the one that this person himself would choose. That is, 1 or 2/30 of this person's vote will go for the wrong option, but 28 or 29/30 of his vote will go for the option that he would have chosen. Yes, representativeness is also slightly blurred. But in fact, it is eroded much more evenly than in the Soviet system. Well, because they will smear it in both directions. That is, Vasia's 2 delegates voted not for Vasia's option, but for the second one, and Petyu, who would have voted for the second option himself, had 28 delegates voted for the second option, and 2 voted for the first one. And thus, the alignment has hardly changed. That is, both ways, 1 vote for one option, 1 vote for the second option. They crossed paths, due to the fact that this process goes both ways. On average, it turned out something like this. And due to this, representativeness is preserved, as it were. And there is no loss of votes either. That is, almost always the voice of this person, he stayed, and almost entirely went for the option that he would have chosen himself. Sometimes a question is also asked about this, but is there some kind of hierarchical delegation there? That is, if I delegated Vasia, and Vasia Petya, can someone else delegate Petya right away? Or should he be Vasia first, and can Petya delegate his vote to me? Well, such a cyclical, closed, yes, get delegation. Maybe some prohibitions are needed. Not really. There are no prohibitions needed here. Any graph can be resolved here, due to the fact that the principle works. When a person himself voted for some option, his vote completely departs for this option, due to the fact that this principle is arbitrarily complex graph, such a delegation grid. It is resolvable absolutely unambiguously, and it's not very difficult, even in terms of computational complexity, but it's almost a linear process in terms of speed. That is, it will not even be difficult to calculate it. In principle, this can be shown in the diagrams, but you can try it yourself. Draw some arbitrary graph. There are 5 delegates all somehow there, maybe with some omissions. Then, we assume which of the people in this graph voted, and make sure, by moving the pen or mouse right there to the graph, make sure that yes, we will get to the point every time that someone voted, and this determined the outcome of the entire vote. And this too, probably needs to be shown somehow with the help of a program. I haven't done it yet, but it's really easy stuff. It may seem at first that there are tangled graphs that are undecidable, but no, they are solvable, and always unambiguously. Therefore, there are no restrictions in this regard. All people in a friendly team can delegate their votes to each other. Well, if they really trust each other completely, please. Any single person from this collective who voted, anyone, yes, he will determine the vote of the whole collective in this way, without taking away from the collective the opportunity to vote personally, reject his option, vote for some other one instead. But nevertheless, delegates have some limitations. Delegation, again, I repeat, in any direction, any interweaving of Vasia Petya, Petya Vasia, is permissible, everything is fine. But delegates have some technical limitations. The first limitation, regardless of whether we have an open or closed vote, the voting of delegates is always open. Simply because otherwise, a person cannot find out how his delegate votes. Is he really still his delegate? Is he not deceiving him? Anyone can refuse, but say, "You are not appointing me as a delegate. I do not take on such responsibility." And if we allow a closed vote, his vote can be closed. Well, or all of them will have it closed. If a person says that he is a delegate, his vote is available to everyone. Not only to those who delegate the vote to him, as it might seem, because it's an illusion of security, yes, an illusion of secrecy. Anytime someone wants to know how a person who was someone's delegate voted, yes, he did. He will be appointed to you as a delegate, he will look at his vote, and immediately be appointed back again. In other words, it is an illusion of security. In fact, this is not security at all. If at least someone sees the delegate vote, everyone can watch it. It's better to do this right away, so that you just don't overload the systems with these yourself subscribed, unsubscribed. If a person is afraid of something, he can always say that I do not need to be a delegate, and the vote is closed. Is there such a thing at all advisable? Yes, it is allowed. It doesn't seem to me that this is at all advisable. It is always better to do an open vote, but the whole population always decides this with the help of direct democracy. It can deprive, make it closed. And it may decide that it is impossible to look at the delegates for voting either. But it's fraught, right? That's why I explain why it must necessarily be visible. But, at the same time, the system itself helps people in any case. Yes, it shows candidates for delegates, and not those who said, "Delegate to me, I'm so wonderful." No, she does it purely technically. She finds for each pair of people the votes in which they both voted, and considers the correlation of their options. They chose the same option differently. Everyone can ask themselves some threshold, say, "Show me those who have 0.95 correlation with me." And then, either just write them down as a delegate right away, or see what kind of people they are, read their articles, or look at statistics on their votes. Well, because you never know, maybe some questions to this person are particularly important, it seems to me. He needs a correlation on them. He can tell in the system about these issues, tell me. Correlation, and there's a list. Well, that is, he has a lot of opportunities for analysis, but the system tells him at the same time. If he saw some person outside the system, this person seemed sensible to him, and he wants to make him a delegate. He can also come and see before making him a delegate, but they actually vote the same way, because you never know. Maybe it was a deceptive impression. This time, it seemed to him that his speech was convincing. In fact, he has other beliefs and goals in general. And at the same time, the system is already in the process of delegating. It shows the person, and how everything is going with the delegate there. Since a person still participates in some votes, the system continues to consider this correlation, and there is some kind of trigger there. Well, there, for example, if the correlation has fallen, it has become less than 0.9. It is necessary to warn the person. Well, or not for all the time, maybe, but there for the last month, or there for the last 2 months. In other words, there may be several of these criteria. But again, the criterion is total, it's bad to do it. Why? Because here are thousands of previous votes, they coincided. And the correlation, it is very high for us, is close to 1. And then, the person who is a delegate went crazy and started voting for some nonsense. But, due to the fact that there are thousands of those votes, and only 10 new ones, the correlation has changed slightly, and the thresholds for the sum of all votes have not yet been reached. That is, he's still over there, or 95. It's falling, but not fast enough. Therefore, perhaps some other criteria are worth it. That is, there for the last month, for the last 6 months, a person can look at this case all the time, and receive a notification that you check, maybe that one has gone crazy, or turned out to be not who he pretended to be, his account was stolen there or there, I do not know. He is being held hostage and forced to vote like that. In any case, he should probably be excluded from the delegates. But first deal with it. That is, the system offers only at the request of a person, but not forcibly. She offers him on purely statistical grounds those who can be a delegate, and warns about the delegates. It's clear here, if people follow the thought, I've said a lot, that this can be used for manipulation. There's an obvious way of manipulation, right? Whoever controls the system can manipulate this item here. In other words, it can show pseudo-good candidates. There it is really complicated by the fact that they still have to somehow vote them to forge. He can let our advertising go, but what to do with correlation? Yo, a person can count in another program, they're in Excel, but nevertheless, it is possible to somehow give pseudo results. Appoint someone as a delegate. Well, here, however, the question arises, if a person controls the system, why doesn't he immediately need to draw the distribution of votes for him? But suppose he is shy about doing this, he manipulates more subtly, he slips delegates. Or I tweak the notification so that they wouldn't come about the right delegate here. In other words, he needs a delegate sent to him. Yes, at some point, he starts voting not the way everyone else wants. But there is no notification about it, in the hope that people will not notice it soon. And this is really the ground for manipulation, from which it follows. However, it follows not only from this whole bunch of things that this system should not have a master, it is its electronic part. In other words, this system, it should exist as something distributed, duplicated many times, that is, a structure close in principles to the blockchain and analogs. A client who is on your computer, he checks with a bunch of other holders of the same set of files about the indicator, but usually this is a checksum that allows you to find out whether this file is valid or not valid. And if, roughly speaking, 100 people have one checksum, someone else has another, then apparently that one has a fake file, and it is not necessary to take it. It is necessary to take from everyone else, and this one should be blocked altogether. That is, in fact, this system is located on a bunch of users' computers. A bunch of times the data is duplicated, and at the same time, at each check, many users are asked for confirmation for exactly the same purpose. If someone locally forged data, it will turn out that he has one data, and the thousands of users we interviewed have other data. That is, he probably has a fake, and not 1,000. And since these requests are random in this case, it is extremely difficult even to conspire with a group of thousands of people in order to simulate a department, because it is extremely unlikely that this 1,000 will be chosen out of millions. In other words, this system, if it is distributed, it is resistant to this kind of manipulation. It can still be done at the level of psychology, that is, to create some kind of cult. Do not check the delegates there. But it is already very difficult to do this at the software level. And, accordingly, as it is now, casting votes in such a system is very difficult to organize, almost impossible. It's really necessary to infect a bunch of computers with viruses that somehow modify these local clients. This is an unaffordable thing. That is, hypothetically it is possible, but it is much more complicated than any other method, in any other system that exists at the moment. Also, as for the delegates, there is a moment there, how to be in the case, when Vasya delegated Petya, Petya delegated Kalyu. But, if Vasya didn't vote, and Petya didn't vote, then Vasya's vote doesn't count at all. Or we should look at how Kalyu voted, since he is a delegate of Petya. According to this vote, we will find out where Petya's vote was delegated and where Vasya's vote was delegated to. Which option is better is unknown. They are actually at the level of trust or not trust. I think there should be a setting about this. In other words, how to act in such cases. A person has n delegates there, let's say 100. 50 voted on some issue, 50 did not. Well, a person has a setup, what to do with the votes of the 50 that they voted. There are a bunch of options out there. The first option is to divide this person's vote among the 50 who voted. Moreover, if 1 out of 100 votes, this one will completely dispose of this person's vote. To someone, this option may seem more reliable, more, as it were, soothing, because he chose these personally, and he no longer knows who they cleaned. To someone else, on the contrary, it may seem that because there is a situation where 3 of my delegates voted in total, and 97 did not, and if these 3 choose an option that I don't like, my vote will go entirely for the option that I don't like. Although, if everyone voted 100, it would be 3/100ths for the option that they like, 97/100ths for the one that they like. Using this logic, we can say that if 97 did not vote themselves, look at how their delegates voted, and my vote is also proportionally distributed. In other words, this is some kind of setup in the system, and this is probably not all the options that are possible. That is, there can be something more cunning. Well, like there's a threshold to set. For example, if half of my delegates voted, then the vote is divided between them, and if less than half, then somehow delegation of the second degree is considered. I don't know if you can call someone multi-stage delegation. Maybe in some proportion. That is, there are 0.6 of my vote distributed by those who voted personally. 0.4 here with multi-stage delegation. But in any case, everyone can choose this option for themselves, but mainly for peace of mind. Because, in my opinion, there will be no fundamental practical difference between this. But it may seem to someone that it exists. In addition, it may be possible to somehow prove that one option is better than the other, and there will be no need to rewrite the entire system. It will just be necessary to spread information about the evidence, and everyone will choose this option in their settings. That is, with a multi-stage delegate, despite the fact that there are a lot of options, and they also ask about it. It is solved by setting up. There is no special magic here. None of these options is destructive, in the sense that it does not contradict direct democracy. The fact that a person decides for himself which one to choose also does not contradict direct democracy, his right. But he could have done it manually, or with the help of a script written by him personally. But why? You can embed it right into the system. Why force people, if they want to implement this option, to add something themselves? In my opinion, there is no point in this. It's easier to do it through the system. Questions about government agencies. How that government agency will work, like this one. Well, let's start with the fact that in this system, in a system with such a direct democracy, the executive power in the form in which it is now, it does not exist at all. In other words, now we are choosing the branches of the executive branch, the president there, the governors. Sometimes we choose the president appoints someone. Sometimes there are more cunning ways. Well, for example, it elects people to parliament, and the parliament appoints someone to the post of prime minister. There are also such systems. There's nothing like that here. The thing is, the people who are the executive branch, they have the right to make decisions. And in a direct democracy, one person cannot make a decision. But he can make decisions only in those matters that concern only him. Here he is sitting alone in his apartment, wants to move from the sofa to a chair. This is the decision he makes. If it concerns someone else, no, he can only offer his own version. Yes, and this also applies to doctors. Moreover, not everyone knows, but doctors in most countries, including Russia, cannot do something on their own. They can do this only with the informed consent of the patient. Doctors may not tell you about it, although they are obliged to. But nevertheless, it is so. The decision on how to treat you is made by you right now, and not by the doctor at all. The doctor offers you options. The doctor tells you I can do the operation, describes the consequences, what will happen if done, what will happen if not done. You can agree, or you can refuse. At the same time, the doctor has the right to bring some other operation at the time of the first one, only if there is some complication, from which you can die at all. If he finds something else there, he will usually have to conduct a second one. But, if there is absolutely something small, he can as it were on the spot, implying that you will agree. But otherwise, he should tell you, but we have discovered this, perhaps a second operation is needed. And so according to the law, and you have every right to refuse the operation. You have the right to go to another doctor. You can go to Tibetan monks. You're right, Tibetan monks will probably help you less than doctors, but nevertheless, any doctor can be a charlatan. He may not guess, the patient chooses. In other words, it is not necessary to think that there are some areas in which a specialist necessarily makes a decision. Even in such an important area as your health and even your life, the decision is not made by a doctor. It's the same situation here. No one who is in a role that corresponds to one degree or another to the current executive power can make a decision. The decision is always made by the team. These same people are the executive branch in quotation marks. I even suggest renaming it into something else, so that there is no temptation, and people do not have a wrong ideal. Well, these people, they always act as employees in relation to society. In other words, the decision-making team is the customer. The executive branch is in quotation marks, whoever their employee is. If it is a group of people, they can make decisions about interaction between themselves within themselves, but in terms of the tasks set, they cannot solve for others. But, with the exception of those cases, when they were told what kind of paint you will find, paint the fence like this. And there's a list. Here they said such a color is suitable, but we don't care. You can choose which one is easier. Only in these cases, but if there are such solutions, there should be very few of them. They should be insignificant. Again, society may decide otherwise, but these are recommendations, otherwise everything will work poorly. I'm just not going to make a reservation every time, just always remember, yes, that all decisions about how it works are made by the whole society, through direct voting. And then, in addition to the rules of the game, here's what I'm setting out. These are my recommendations about which option is best to take. In other words, here I act as the very specialist who argues for the solutions proposed by him, says why it is better. That is, whether it is a person, an organization, or a corresponding room of state bodies, she only executes, as an employee of the collective, the decisions of this collective. Internally, they can agree on how best to organize the work, but, in terms of interaction with the outside world, that is, with the team, they are obliged to consult with him. Even if it seems to them that it is possible to do better somehow, they cannot take it and do better themselves. They should say there is a better option, vote suitable or not, agree or not. In other words, act as consultants too. And this is the right of every person, yes, to act as a consultant. Moreover, if someone from this body is a member of this very collective that this body hired, he also votes in it. But one person is one vote, that is, he does not have any bonus. It can be people from the outside, well, for example, living in another area, who were hired to paint the walls of the entrance there. If one of them lives in this entrance, he makes a decision together with all the other residents of the entrance. The others don't accept it, because it's not their entrance, they can't vote there. But they are all in their role of painters, they implement this decision, which was made by the residents of the entrance. And so it is at any level. The decision is always made by the team, except for some insignificant things, which should be, well, here is the minimum amount. Otherwise the wringing out of power will begin. Accordingly, as I have already said, any such organization, and I suspect that any other organization too, that is, not only those that do the same thing that government agencies are doing now, any organization in general, it is governed by direct democracy, in matters that relate to its internal functioning. In other words, what it does as a whole is determined by its customer, who, as a rule, acts as a society. But there may also be individuals. Within themselves, what these individuals do not concern, they decide with the help of direct democracy. And this applies to all issues. That is, there is a budget, work schedule, salary values, bonuses, and so on. This decision is made within the organization. Some restrictions may come from outside. Well, for example, that it is impossible to do the distribution of salaries of such and such. Well, you can't give half of the salary budget to one person and divide the other half among the others. It is impossible to assign a salary 100 times more to someone there than to someone else. These are external constraints, but, within this limitation, they decide for themselves. And this has a very good effect on the morale of employees. It may seem that they are there for you, right? But this is to the question of specialists. In fact, the report of so-and-so. Well, yes, they can listen to an accountant, they can listen to some more experienced person who will give them their recommendations. But nevertheless, if it seems to them that these people are talking nonsense, why would they necessarily implement the decisions of those one or two people who are like specialists? Or maybe they are deceiving others, or maybe they are stupid, just pretending to be smart, or maybe they have no experience. They imitated it. When people decide the whole team themselves, they have much fewer questions. They don't have a question, why do I get paid so little, but he gets paid so much? And he participated in the salary discussion, right? He understands that this is the decision of the whole team. If it seems to him that the team has deprived him, well, it's probably better for him to quit and not work with them. Otherwise, he understands that this is the decision of the majority to distribute it exactly like this. The same thing with the budget. there is no question whether the boss stole money there, and whether he is involved in some kind of corruption scheme. Everyone voted for the budget, everyone voted on which part of the available money would go where. And it should be noted, it may seem strange, yes, that it is so dangerous to do. I have friends who have tried to do this, even at private firms owned by them. And you know, people do not manifest themselves to everyone in the way that is considered to be an absentia. That is, it seems that people will decide first of all, but let's divide the entire budget among ourselves, and then at least the grass will not grow. Well, because they are stupid, they are only pursuing their own benefit. It turns out not. Most understand, and maybe even all. Well, at least most of them. They understand that if they don't want the organization to close next month as a result of bankruptcy, you can't do that. That is, it is impossible to take and distribute all the funds available right away in the form of salaries for this month. People understand this normally. It's not some kind of inventive activity. Yes, it's almost an obvious thing. And if suddenly the people themselves did not guess, someone will guess, explain to them. And this is so obvious in a number of cases that, well, there's just nothing to object to this case. Well, in some organizations, okay, that's where the idiots gathered, and they did exactly that. But maybe such an organization does not need to exist. How many useful things will these idiots do there? On the contrary, it's good, the organization quickly self-destructed, did not have time to bring a lot of harm to everyone else. In other words, there is nothing much to be afraid of in this regard. That is, it would seem that people without any special skills, they haven't studied for managers or accountants there for 100 years. But almost anyone can guess before that, as it turns out. There is no need to worry about this. Yes, well, maybe one organization in 1,000 will be closed. Well, everyone will get valuable experience. The next organization they work for will avoid this already. And 999 organizations, they will continue to work, and will work better than before. And the employees will be much better, both psychologically, physically, and morally. That is, everyone only wins. So, let's summarize. Any team, that is, everyone who votes on some area of issues, formulates a task for a certain performer. It can be a state organization in quotation marks, yes, the executive branch in quotation marks. It may be a private firm, it may be a public organization, it does not matter. Any performer, the team formulates the task accordingly, that is, what should be received at the end. Formulates restrictions, that is, what exactly cannot be done. That is, in the area that does not fall under the restriction. Some freedom remains for the performer. It is clear that every swing of the hammer, every turn of the handle on the machine, the team cannot and should not control and explain in advance. But in this regard, production decisions are made by those who are engaged in production, and the team is interested in not having any unacceptable consequences. Well, for example, there, I do not know. It is impossible to spoil the entire environment with any chemicals during production. Finally, he formulates deadlines, and the team does all this with the help of direct democracy and the involvement of consultants. Moreover, he can even consult with the performer. And this, by the way, makes a lot of sense. That is, he has experience as a performer. It also makes sense to listen to his options. But this does not mean that they should always be fulfilled. And the collective in general provides everything to the organization in this form. However, the organization that does the job, it also has a certain will of its own. At least in most cases, she can refuse to perform this task. In some cases, this seems to be impossible, but nevertheless, it is impossible to keep a person somewhere by force. That is, if this organization is such that it cannot refuse to perform tasks from a certain area, it can refuse to make an employee and quit from there. If this is something mega unacceptable at all, the organization, as it were, cannot refuse, but all employees have left it. Well, like now look for someone who will perform your idiotic, unrealistic tasks. And those do not want for moral reasons or for reasons that we will not meet exactly these deadlines, and we do not want to have problems later. Well, or for some other reason. Moreover, as I have already said, it is usually impossible to guess from the first time, so the team can understand during the execution of the task that they made a mistake somewhere and revote on some issues. Well, Do not reopen the vote, just tick the boxes in other places. Another option will win, and the organization at this moment should stop executing what corresponded to the cancelled option and start, it seems, executing another version. Yes, we lost resources at the same time. Well, we must remember that there is such a thing as the Concord effect. Yes, when it seems to us that we have already invested so much in this business that we cannot stop halfway, we must definitely lead to the end. But this is a serious cognitive distortion, yes, a kind of common misconception. Why? Because the fact that we have lost resources for something, it does not prove in any way that we need to continue. On the contrary, it often means that it is better to stop now, because we will lose even more resources. That is, now that we have already realized that this is a bad option, it's better to say, yeah, it's a pity that we lost those resources, but at least we will stop the execution now, we won't lose any additional resources. So, the team has changed its mind, the organization has stopped execution, and, if it agrees to the changed option, it begins to implement it. But she can just as well refuse. That is, say we agreed to those conditions, we do not agree to the new ones. In this regard, the team can conduct some negotiations with the organization, that is, start some kind of vote, like either they refuse at all, or we will soften something there, or change something. Here they say that it is impossible to do this. Maybe we need to change some nuances somehow, yes, return the task to the executable one again. But be that as it may, the organization and the team may not agree. In this case, the organization refuses further execution. She does not return the resource because she performed quite honestly the version that was valid. That is, it's not her fault. But, at the same time, in statistics, well, every organization has some kind of public statistics, some description of their work, so that people can understand who they are dealing with. Direct democracy, right? Everyone has to keep track of everything in some way. In other words, this information is public. Accordingly, in this public information, in this statistics, the fact of refusal is entered, plus all these nuances. Yes, how it was. There was such an order, then it was changed, the organization gave such and such arguments, refused to fulfill it. At the same time, both the version of the team is presented, and they again vote to choose which version to place there, and the version of the organization. She chooses which version to place inside herself. Accordingly, those who look at this case, they see both options, both an explanation of the organization and an explanation of the team. At first, of course, there will be squabbles, but two versions are already good, and maybe there are 3 or 4 of them, because, for example, they can, by general agreement, appoint a commission that investigates this case, and then there will be a lying version of the commission. Or maybe there is more than one commission, or maybe some other external body that is engaged in some kind of investigations. There may be investigative committees and so on. Their version lies. All these versions, the one who wants to interact with this organization later, he sees. He can make a decision on them. Who is right here, and to what extent, who is to blame. At first, of course, there will be conflicts, and perhaps there will be versions with mutual accusations of all the most terrible sins. But over time, people will get used to and, well, first of all, something will be negotiated at the negotiation stage, and the organization will, as a rule, fulfill the order. Simply because everyone already has a habit of how to conduct these negotiations, how to negotiate in general. And secondly, people will also get into the habit that, well, for some reason, this organization cannot fulfill your order. There is no need to hold a grudge for her. Well, let's part amicably with her, because they have done nothing wrong. They just don't know how to do it, for example. And some other organization can. Well, they told us honestly, we don't know how. We said Oklahoma, then we'll find someone else. No one has any complaints against anyone. It's still recorded in the statistics, but everyone who goes to Reddit, he sees that they are lovingly separated. The organization is honest, honestly said, we can't do it. The team does not hold a grudge against it. That is, in principle. On the issues that the organization copes with, you can contact it. On the contrary, they will not cheat, they will not pull resources, they will honestly say everything from the very beginning. Well, then we are already beginning to delve into some details. There are a lot of questions about the same level of importance. I will answer all the questions just one by one, and if I forget to answer any of them, but you write a chat here, I'll answer it later. It should be noted that here, by the way, I did not tell everything I had prepared, but it already turned out to be an hour and a half. So I decided to split it into two parts. In the first part, tell the main thing, and in the second part, which will be some other day, I think next week, respectively, there will be frequently asked questions, but at the same time, with some prepared answer. And now, accordingly, such a freer conversation begins, including with answers to questions that were asked in the chat. The first question, accordingly, a certain part of the country, let's say, geographically isolated, for some reason, wants to get more independence up to a full exit. That is, the vast majority of this area wants to. Probably the rest of the country, that is, the citizens living there, do not want this. What's to be done here? But again, as I have already said, in any case, this cannot be written directly into the rules of direct democracy. Yes, it is decided by some kind of gathering of the entire population. Or perhaps, if this country is going from some parts, well, for example, the whole world has decided to unite into one state, within the framework of direct democracy. When they join, they can discuss the terms of joining. This is another factor. And of course, it is impossible to predict in advance who will want to join on what terms or agree to join there. But I can say some of my recommendation, or rather my view on how it should be arranged. That is, when some area wants to separate, apparently it has reasons for that. Probably, some kind of negotiation process will begin with the question, why do you actually want to separate? Moreover, I have not directly said about it here. It will probably be more detailed next time. In general, I have a prediction that in this system, everything will go towards some kind of decentralization, because most of the issues are more convenient to solve locally. And here's a good question. But why did the region decide to separate at all? They already solve most of the issues on the ground. And altogether, they solve only some mega-global issues, which I do not know, spread to the whole world there. But nevertheless, if they have such fundamental differences, and the majority of the population really wants to separate, and in fact, how to prevent them? Should I start a war with them? Well, here, within the framework of direct democracy, there is no way to prevent him from taking it. Is there a way to persuade them? Yes, there is. There's a way, I don't know, to say temporarily. Okay, we'll make an agreement with you so that you will temporarily live there alone, but you can come back at any time. In other words, this is the softest way, yes, without any fundamental conflict, without spoiling the relationship, once and for all, but nevertheless, with the possibility of a return. I don't see any other way. And how else? But suppose we have dictators, some region wants to secede. Well, that's how the British Empire was, the colonies were separated from it. And what ways did they have, other than to introduce troops there? Yes, there are none. Only to persuade the troops to lead or persuade. But here it is the same. In my opinion, a set of troops is a bad option, because after that, it will be an occupation regime. Relations will never normalize. Well, or not ever, for a very long time there, until a generation changes, and those who are caught will already be a minority. Next question. There are some questions I can only answer here, because there is just such a question here. And can't we just leave the vote hanging, and you can vote whenever you want? Well, until 51% say of those who have the right to vote, vote for. Well, yes, it remains hanging. That is, he has a certain concept of a deadline there, after which it comes into force, but if he didn't get to the thief, or if the deadline passed, I will start implementing it, it still continues to hang. In other words, you can change the decision at any time, stop the process. Well, it's the same if the food is not collected, but it will hang for 10 years. If there is ever enough, well, maybe for some reason it is relevant, it will begin to be implemented, everyone will be warned. You know, we found a necropolis. Please note that the initiative that appeared 20 years ago has finally taken off. In any case, at any moment people can find out, there is no need to look for it. It was an accident that she took off. Well, then there was a consideration for this too, the commentator wrote. It seems that since the people do not vote, it means that the law is not very necessary. If needed, he will vote. Here everything is exactly on this principle and really holds. That is, If people need it, they will vote very quickly. Someone figured something out, started telling me how to do it, everyone says, yes, 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 that's right. We've wanted this for a long time. And on the other hand, if someone has started a vote that only he is interested in, well, yes, it will hang indefinitely, until he somehow convinces everyone that there is at least some interest in this. So, now more. Why is it not considered that the original powers will be transferred from the city level to the regional level? In fact, it is. I say that if we assemble a country from some fragments, then it's like that anyway. In other words, it is defined by the framework, well, by the merger agreement, this transfer of powers to the highest level, which did not exist before the merger, is just defined. In other cases, it can also be exactly the same, but why does it make sense to discuss the division of powers at the level of the whole country, so that it does not happen that different subjects of the same level have fundamentally different rights? In other words, it can irritate people in principle. Again, it is possible, within the framework of this universal vote, to agree that this is a completely normal situation. Let each region have its own agreement with everyone else. By the way, there are countries that live by this principle. In other words, they have different subjects. They are in different contracts with a certain common association. In particular, the Commonwealth, but this is essentially the United Kingdom, its former colonies, those that have not completely separated, but still remain. By the way, there are very large countries there, if anyone does not know. India, for example. Canada and Australia are members of the Commonwealth. That's how they do it. In other words, the Commonwealth has its own agreements with each country. In fact, what in particular can the Queen of England do in this country? With some who are formally in the Commonwealth, she can't do anything at all. In other words, their whole community consists in the fact that, well, they hold some events for, let's say, not coverage of each other's culture. Well, it can be film festivals, I don't know, some holidays. And for others already there in Canada, the Queen appoints the Governor General. In other words, it is a very dependent country on Britain. It is clear here that all things that do not directly contradict direct democracy, in principle, can probably be implemented at the level of such personal contracts. But it's not a fact that most people will like it. For example, it seems strange to me that different subjects have different rights, although the subjects are of the same level. Next question. Lex, well, let's say you're right. Suppose you give examples of using these formulas in practice, their implementation. There you go. I spoke there as I reported. Here's a friend of mine at his company did this. For 3 years now. I literally talked to him today, and he confirmed that he is still working. Yes, indeed, it works here. The team makes very good decisions. There are some reservations there, we discussed them with him today, but nevertheless it works. There are all kinds of organizations like People's Cooperatives. Well, the People's Cooperative. They even told me today what it is called in Russian legislation, but I forgot. It's also some kind of cooperative. The point there is that this is a cooperative that does not have a personal owner and does not even have shareholders. That is, whoever works in it is the owner, along with everyone else. Stopped being the owner. You can't sell your share either. But there, many decisions are made with the help of direct democracy. It cannot be said that everyone has it in general, because there are more than one such organizations, and each one may have its own nuances there. But nevertheless, here it works. Experiments were conducted on the example of computer games, in which a lot of things can be done. There is a type of civilization, or a hard fire, too, as if it works. In other words, people collectively decide what to do with voting. They play no worse than the average player, usually even better. What was the experiment? But I lost the link, where they were just trying to see which team would play better. The one with a hierarchy of subordination, or a team with direct democracy. And it turned out that a team with direct democracy wins more often, and has better results. Well, this is generally not surprising, because mathematics is not some abstract set of numbers. Yes, this is a simulation of a certain reality. This is the ability to make predictions. If the model is relatively close to reality, it cannot be that one thing turned out in the forecasts but in reality, it will be completely different. This means that the model and I did not guess at all. Maybe you didn't guess, but show me where you didn't guess. There didn't seem to be any unrealistic assumptions there. There is the only assumption that is used everywhere, that a person is able to guess the correct answer better than a coin. But in my opinion, it is logical, yes, because a coin is the lowest level. It is impossible to guess worse than a coin. And well, a person, probably, he is not exactly a random mechanism. After all, he can track some patterns. And then there's math. What follows from this? What should I do if some answer is required in a short time? How many votes should be expected before consensus? There is an example in the same article, and even in this report, it was said that it is a misconception, that the dictator makes decisions faster. But he can, if he only deals with one solution of everything, he may accept it. That is, here he is, he has nothing to do at all. In the last year, the only decision was told to take. But in such conditions, his team was accepted quickly. And in the new case, we are faced with a situation where we have 100,000 people, or 100 million people in society, and there is only one dictator. That is, in a society of 100 million people, people who are interested in this issue will be found very quickly, and who are not busy at this moment, unlike the dictator. Again, I'm abstracting from the correctness of the decision now. I'm just talking about the speed of response. If the quota is not some kind of prohibitively high, it is recruited much faster than a dictator who would have decided on this decision. Here, for some reason, people misunderstand this matter. I have repeatedly considered, well, I have not considered, I have heard yes, that well. It seems to a person that the dictator is sitting there ready or the boss is there, a piece of paper is shoved into his hands. He immediately says, the answer is, yes, just look with your eyes in the office. There may be such a stack of papers lying there, and there is something, what lies under the bottom there. It could come to this there in 2 years. And this decision is urgent or not urgent, but it's like he won't guess that it's urgent. When a nuclear missile is flying, it's probably urgent, or there when the whole city is burning already. But look at how quickly our authorities reacted to the situation with the coronavirus, for example. It's just that, how many people have already written about the fact that there is a problem, and when the authorities responded? In other words, here's a great example of how things really are. That is, almost everyone already knows, except those who make the decision. There is a recommendation on this matter. If an answer is required in a short time, then a dictator should be appointed. The ancient Romans, and not only them, very well tested that this principle leads to the abyss. Because as soon as they started using this chip, the dictator was appointed immediately every other time, and then he didn't want to leave. At the same time, it did not lead to the fact that the problem was solved quickly. Often, with a purely Republican state of affairs, issues of the same level were resolved much faster. But they still had a problem there, which is not there now. There was a communication problem. In other words, this is a one-man decision. It won in a sense, because we have restrictions on the exchange channel with some areas. When it is necessary to notify only the dictator, anyway, of course, the messenger will go there. Well, I do not know. A week and back a week. But at least, the dictator is already waiting for him. He has brought something. The dictator has given him the following order. And if they would have arranged democracy on this occasion, it would have been longer. But we don't have that anymore. We don't need to send a messenger. Everyone is on the internet. Everyone learns everything instantly, including the decision is recognized instantly. That is, even here, even the minimal expediency that was in Roman times is no longer valid. In other words, there is no point in this, only the risk increases, and there are no bonuses. You can make some kind of performer, you can appoint some kind of person, well, like a rapid response team. That is, there is some kind of emergency crew. If the house falls, they drive fast, they prop it up, without waiting for everything to be decided. But the thing is, these are not dictators. They don't dictate their decision to everyone else. They have predefined powers, very narrow and predefined situation, in which they can dispose of these powers. That is, it is real. Well, It's like how a doctor makes a decision when a person is brought to him who is about to die, and you can't ask him yet because he is unconscious, and there is no time to look for relatives there because he will die during this time. Under these conditions, can a doctor take any measures to save this person's life? And in all the others it can't. In one question, yes. Does this make a doctor a dictator? Oh no, it becomes a rapid response team. There is another option. Next question. Yes, there is another option, to create an artificial intelligence that will lead the country, like Skynet or an architect from the Matrix. By the way, I've heard this option many times, and I've heard it in all seriousness. People are developing some kind of organization of society in which they will manage, and they even sent me some texts there for 50 pages where exactly this concept was set out there. Well, without details. In other words, it's not some kind of elaboration with formulas, it's more like such dreams. But it would be great if so. Well, I can say, but what is fundamentally different from a person? That is, if we say that a person cannot make a decision alone, why suddenly can? Even if it is such, and which is really self-sufficient, and we know for sure that no one has specially taught it, why would he make decisions? But it's usually even worse. That is, usually someone has developed, and he has been taught some data. If you delegate decision-making to him, then in fact you give this right to those who have developed it. And the fact that they guessed with goal setting is far from a fact. In other words, it's not that they made a bad character there. No, oh, well, and it's like an adaptive system. In other words, yes, he quite honestly adapted to the data that he was given for training. Here he was told there an example of some parameters that he should monitor, and the answer. Example response. So he remembered how the parameters are related to the answer. But this set was made by someone. In other words, someone said that in this case it is necessary to give such an answer, in this case this, and so on. And so you gave them this right. It's just that now it's automated. They do not say it themselves according to their own understanding in each subsequent case, but it speaks for them but in the way they would say it. Here, anyone can do it for themselves. Well, even if there is a general one, yes, everyone can run it at home and consult with him, if he trusts him. There is no problem here, but to simply transfer all control to something is the same as transferring it to a dictator, or a small group of people there. Next question. Can they change the percentage of the budget for a particular area within, say, plus or minus 1 or 2% as much as they want, when planning the budget as part of a general vote? That is, you never know what will happen. We planned for one situation, but our situation changed in the middle of the year, and we need to change everything. Maybe I'm not even talking about an accident there, or about how it is now. Yes, with the coronavirus. The situation has changed radically compared to what was planned. Maybe up to the point that some kind of invention may have been made, and we wanted to spend 10% of the budget there on developing something, but while it was being developed, well, this budget was not fully spent yet. Suddenly something was discovered, well, even the same people who were entrusted with it to implement, that changed the whole concept in general. And it turned out that it was necessary. Well, I do not know, 2% of the budget is enough, and it will be 10 times better. Or vice versa, it will be 1,000 times better, but we need not 10, but 20%. Well, they took it, changed it. In other words, the budget is a kind of our forecast for what will happen next. This is not some kind of, well, a commandment cast in bronze, which must be strictly observed. These are some preliminary assumptions. Well, I was just talking about the budget today. If I have such a question among those trained, because it is often asked, and who accepts these budgets there? How does it work in general? But in short, the situation there is such that there is no solid budget. In other words, it is now for technical reasons that the budget for the year is being adopted. In this system, it is not necessary to adopt a budget for a year. That is, there is some kind of flow. In other words, I don't even know how to say it correctly, but the budget for the year is that we allocated a certain block from the very beginning and said what shares to cut it into. And in this system, it is logical to consider the budget as a flow. That is, for each unit of time, a small one, there are some resources that flow in for a day, for a week. and we determine at each moment of time and in which directions they will spread. This is a slightly different concept, and in my opinion, it is more logical to follow it within this system. The next question is about who is worthy of what. There is a kind of highly specialized society. How will people with a narrow specialization be able to make decisions in what they do not understand? How road workers will decide where to put hospitals? To this there are questions. How, being not an expert, a person will be able to objectively assess the competence of a specialist, to whom he will entrust his voice. Oddly enough, there is an answer to the first part in this sub-question. And how do you know that this road worker understands the issue worse than the one who called himself a specialist? It doesn't follow from anywhere. There was mentioned one quoted historian in the comments who tells everyone that he is a mega specialist. You are absolutely sure that it follows from this that he is a mega specialist and that he is well versed. I'm not sure, and I know such people to a fig. Here recently, just the other day, the fuss rose again about the fact that the Academy of Sciences, mind you, this is not Rogan, this is the same Academy of Sciences, dragging articles about homeopathy. The very top, right. Here's an example of how experts make decisions. And they know exactly what people who are not in the Academy of Sciences are doing. How is it right? Well, better than those who are not. They know how to do it right. In my opinion, this is not a guarantee, because we always have a question, is it really a specialist? Even there are some organs, they are being selected. We have no guarantee that these organs were selected correctly. Moreover, different organs of different people can be called specialists, to which the example is again clear. They consider these people specialists. When you say that let scientists decide about science, imagine that there is only Ryan. From that moment on, people said, yes, that's a great idea. Let's close these charlatans from wounds and leave only Ryan. And so they will decide what is science and what is not. Well, or as it were, we'll fire everyone, leaving only the top. And they will recruit new ones to the RAN, right? The same ones who agree that this is quite normal. Here is an example. Yes, how, being not an expert, can a person objectively assess the competence of a specialist? In general, he has no guarantee, even if he is a specialist. And if he's not an expert, he doesn't have one at all. But it is nevertheless possible to distinguish. We need to listen to the arguments that people give. That is, not to take someone's word for it. The man said, I understand physics, so this is the truth. Suspicions should immediately appear about such a person, because maybe he really understands, or maybe he's lying. And interestingly, he is most likely lying, because it will be fun for a physicist to tell about how things work. And he will not be limited to this, apparently. But the charlatan will just be limited, because if he starts telling in detail, well, first of all, it needs to be invented, these details, and secondly, it will be very easy to ignite him. And in order to do this, you don't have to be a genius, equal to someone out there, Einstein or Feynman. This person with a minimal habit will be able to do, just understand the arguments. In other words, yes, you can't double-check some data yourself, you can't repeat some experiments yourself, but you can quite check the logic of reasoning. Let it be with consultations. There is some person you trust, you can ask him to explain it to you. But nevertheless, it can be done. It says here, well, the next one is questionable besides, apparently questionable. You talk about changing the voice as something simple, in your opinion. Is it so easy to change the decision on complex issues of electrification or healthcare? You say it's just like drinking a cup of tea. Well, it's not that simple. It's possible. Moreover, the changes, it is not clear to me what the change is about electrification. That is, the question that directly applies to all citizens is, roughly speaking, it is necessary to conduct electricity or not. These may be questions of some kind of security. That is, how to be safe so that electricity is always supplied, and how exactly to tighten the screw at the power plant. Probably this does not particularly apply to citizens. These include the very fact of the existence of a power plant. Due to this, firstly, it is easier for them to make such decisions, and secondly, they still get the opportunity to check it. That is, when some fraudster put noodles on their ears, that here is a power plant for this. it will work on such a project. Maybe they believed him. Well, a reasonable person in these conditions, what will he do? Not a lecturer of them, I note, not a scientist, but any reasonable person, because it just lies on the surface. All right, I'll make a prototype. Well there, I do not know, mate. Show us the model. 100 or 300 or 1,000 people will double-check it and write their reviews, indicating whether he wrote it correctly or not. Well, all right. For some reason, everyone was blunted. They didn't think about it. He started building a power plant. Can I say, show me the keys? Does it work at all or not? If he can't turn it on, it probably doesn't work. Well, yes, it is not fully completed, but you can turn it on not at the very last stage. Well, with nuclear power, yes, it's harder, but some kind of hydroelectric power plant or heat can be turned on just to check. And moreover, it is inevitably done. Well, because, even if we are building a reactor, at some point we need to check whether it works at all. In other words, the fact that we have drawn it on paper is not a guarantee that it will work. There are a lot of intermediate experimental steps, on which one or another part is turned on and watched. Here's how to check. In other words, you may not understand how to design a reactor. Well, how to check something, do you understand? That is, few of you know how, well, I do not know, to make a camera. But when you bought a camera, you somehow check, without being an expert, whether it works or not. Well, here it is also, about the same ratio in terms of complexity. There was an opposite comment at another time, but on the same topic about Libra and specialists. But the weight of construction issues is great for people with an engineering education in medical doctors. Again, we are not talking about the fact that doctors should weigh 10 times more. I read it, but to be honest, I didn't fully understand what it was about. I'm not even sure it's about the same thing. It's like two opposite sentences are written here, but the answer is still the same, regardless of how I understood how it is. Regardless of how I understood this question, correctly or not, the answer is still the same. We don't have an objective way to check if someone is a specialist. And if we ask someone if that other person is a specialist, it is still based on the fact that, first of all, we consider them specialists, and secondly, we still hope that they will not deceive us. Which, by the way, is not the same thing. They can easily cheat for a variety of reasons. That is why it is impossible to give someone increased weights. Even if it would be advisable for specialists to raise them, we still have no way to check whether this is a true specialist. But at the same time, it is technically possible to simulate, but reversibly simulate at the same time, yes, a situation in which FISA specialists have more, and it is built into this system, that is, through a system of delegates. You can delegate your vote to him in this matter, if you trust him. What's even better, you can delegate your vote not only to him, but to hundreds of people whom you consider to be true experts, and not vote on these issues yourself. But if you suddenly find out that they are deceiving you, you have the opportunity to stop everything at any time and start voting yourself. Nevertheless, it is an emulation of a raised voice, but reversible, which occurs without alienating this voice. What is very important? There was also a comment of this kind. This is not a question, a comment, but I want to comment on it too. It is necessary to start from the origins, and this, that is, the origins, apparently, the appropriate upbringing in childhood. Exactly the same problem. We have no way to objectively say what kind of upbringing is right. Different people can name directly opposite approaches, both in terms of methods of education, and most importantly, in this case, critical in terms of goals. That is, how a person should evaluate certain things. Therefore, to say, as it happens in some fantastic books, that we will create a society in which everyone will be raised from childhood by some special ones, but if we don't guess, that is, they will be grown special, but suddenly special in the wrong direction. So what's going to get worse? There is no guarantee here. In other words, we could hope that people will be better. I even hope so. But we should not sharpen the system itself for this matter. Moreover, the system itself should be built without any assumptions that people will somehow change, or their self-control will increase, or something else will happen, which is usually generically called consciousness. No, the system should work, even in those conditions, when it is not. Consciousness, yes, when consciousness has not increased and has not reached some level that someone there dreams of. If it reaches, but it will work even better. But if this is not observed, and the system necessarily requires everyone to be conscious, but it will break very quickly. Because you have no guarantee that even if you have reached it, there is no guarantee that there will not be a rollback at some point. Here, it is the system that is based on the fact that people, just the ones who exist today, have no additional assumptions. People will become better according to my estimates as, yes, that's how I think it is better. Awesome. The system will work cool. I don't mind. But I want it to work on what it is now. If the cooks vote for contradictory options, to build a swimming pool on the central square, to build a skating rink on the central square, how will the builders of the pool and skating rink fight for the square? And if the Tsar orders them to build a swimming pool and an ice rink at the same time? He won't do that. It is more likely that the cooks will not do this, but the king will do it with more probability. Here the question itself is strange to me. In other words, how does a person usually solve such problems? Well, he comes and says, it is impossible to do this. Why? Because I checked, where you want to build, I do not know, a disco, there is the Mariana Trench. We don't know how to build a disco on it. If you are in doubt, but find someone else who knows how to build a disco in Marianskaya Podina. In other words, I don't see any problem here at all. If you were told to do two directly opposite things, how do you solve this case? Say it can't be done at the same time. Here is the solution. So you don't understand how this is different in a democracy. Why is it considered that everything else is insured against the same? Next question. And who will write the software for such voting? Who wants to? It is not necessary that it even exists in a single copy. The main thing is that the protocol is compatible. Where is the guarantee that developers will not be interested in the private interests of a certain group of people during development? And there is no such guarantee. Actually, that's why it should be open source, so that millions of people can check it. Because yes, there may be someone among the developers who wants to optimize it in their favor. How is it with any area at all? Who guarantees, for example, that the Tsar ordered something to be done, and how to ensure that developers, performers do not serve the interests of some other stupid persons? For example, the Tsar personally, or even not the Tsar, but in general, fuck knows who. But kid, you can't guarantee in any way, just check what's there, what's anywhere. There are still a few off-topic questions. Now I'm going to read the ones that were asked while I was answering these. Well, just so as not to get lost, I will answer the ones that used to be. There was such a question. I didn't understand it. The question should start with the words did not understand. I didn't understand about price regulation and production by setting a minimum price of satisfactory demand for everyone. I understand that this is some kind of question, but I don't understand at all what is it about. And is he talking about this lecture? Maybe about some previous ones, about the economy is meant. In general, if you want to get an answer, formulate it so that it can be understood, at least this question. Everything that Lex says will not come true, because the power over the world will be seized by the corporate elite, who will not need human labor for nothing, and communism is also not needed. This, by the way, is the habit of life without democracy. That is, a person automatically thinks of himself as an object, not a subject. That is, that's how the top will decide, and it will be. I can't influence it in any way, and everyone else can't. And yes, it would be great if a good Tsar came and corrected everything, but this will not come. But there will never be any transformations at all. If the majority thinks that we can't do anything about it, then they really can't do anything about it, they don't even try. That is, if you want to change something, I don't urge you to grab a machine gun there and run somewhere to shoot someone. In general, this is an extreme measure, which is only needed in very special conditions. But nevertheless, you always have a lot of tools that you can influence the world around you. You can retell the ideas you like there, thereby agitating people. If we take direct democracy, here I have friends, recent acquaintances, who turned to me and said we want to make such an enterprise like a people's cooperative. Can you tell me in more detail, this is how, from your point of view, direct democracy should be arranged? The laws of the Russian Federation do not prohibit this. This is a completely legitimate activity. You have the right to do this. Here's an example of how to apply. There will be 1,000 of these enterprises. The process will go faster. There will be 1 million or 10 million of them. In fact, all power will already belong to them. Even no one needs to be overthrown. That is, it will already be so in fact. In a completely peaceful way, I note, no one will suffer, well, except for those who will catch fire because they have lost power. But no one will be physically hurt. Please. One more question, and there were several of them, and I will read one out. I vote for your joint stream with Boris Boyarshev. That would be a few suggestions with whom to stream to do. Listen, I don't know these people. That is, if you think it's cool to stream with someone at all, write to that person and write to me. I agree on average. That is, there are a small number of people with whom I would not like to stream, but with the majority, even if they are my mega opponents, yes. Not necessarily they agree with me in everything, but even mega opponents, I would. That is, it's interesting. I don't want to make streams only with the heads of the ham, about which it is known for sure that he will only be rude, because it's just boring and just a waste of time. Otherwise, please write to me, write to the one with whom you think it is necessary to make a stream. So you organized this case, that is, you got consent from both of them. You can pass the contacts, there's a link to him to me, a link to me to him, and then we can make it. Otherwise, it turns out that you are now telling me to go look for someone yourself, spend a lot of time there. Here is the minimum step, by the way, that everyone can do personally. But okay, for some reason, you think that you can't write articles or run a channel, although in my opinion, everyone can with minimal training. Well, let's say you have some kind of psychological problem there, or I don't know, there are diction defects, so it's inconvenient for you. Here's what you can do. To do this kind of coordination of the interaction of some two people within the same stream, but not in the form of a proposal, but do it yourself and figure it out. Namely, to do the maximum possible for this, and people will be grateful to you for it, both the audience and the participants themselves. For example, I really like such initiatives. I think it's right, yes, everyone should conduct some kind of activity if they want something to change. So, now let's see what else we have managed to ask since then. Well, for the time I was answering. It is obvious that for such a structure, a short period of dictatorship of ideological people is needed first. No, not at all. That is, if you started with a dictatorship, even with a short period, then you will have to overthrow them again, and it may be even harder than in the previous ones. And this is the way to the abyss. In other words, on the contrary, we should start with the fact that, regardless of how tough a dictatorship we have, or how much parliamentary democracy we have in the country, I don't mean Russia now, I mean any country at all, right? We need to start with the formation of such democratic, formations on the ground. Yes, it could be anything. It could be a chess club there. It could be an enterprise there, some kind of mini workshop for sewing sneakers. That is anything, just so that people get used to the fact that this is generally possible. And so that when I or someone else is asked the question next time, where are the examples? I would say here are examples. That is, now I'm naming 3 or 4 examples, and so I'm going to name 1,000 examples. It's kind of great, and not just me, anyone can do it. Plus, you yourself will be more comfortable, because in such conditions, it is really psychologically much more comfortable than in conditions of a rigid hierarchy. This is where we need to start, and not with the fact that we are now seizing all power everywhere, and only select the right ones. This task is unsolvable. Well, that is, the Bolsheviks, for example, dreamed that they would seize power. They managed to capture her at the moment when she had already completely fallen. Did they manage to make a megademocracy after that? But not for long. After a while, it began to turn into the same dictatorship as under the Tsar, just with other people in power and slightly different principles. Well, Here's this example, that if you start as a kind of dictatorial current, then it will continue to be the same. No ideological people will fix anything if you start with this. Next question. What does it mean that the organization refused to perform? Elementary. Now you come to some factory and say, make me a table. You give them a blueprint. They say, sorry, but we don't have machines to make a table out of pure gold as you want. That's what it means to refuse. In other words, we cannot or do not want to fulfill this order. We consider it immoral there. We consider it unprofitable. We do not have machines. We do not have people who know how to do it. There are a whole bunch of reasons. We believe that you are offering us very bad conditions, for example. You want to enslave us, so we won't do it. Where is the guarantee that developers will not be interested in the private interests of a certain group of people during development? There is no guarantee. Therefore, it is necessary to check all the time what they do not do. That is, well, sometimes they have some considerations, well, or personal decency. Or there are considerations that they need to somehow maintain their reputation, because if they throw their clients, no one will simply hire them. Yes, even now it's already showing up, because there are a lot of sites with reviews on which you can write how they threw you. And it really spoils many people's lives very much. When the review, which shows that it is justified, that is, there is evidence. And if there is some kind of centralized system, it's even harder. Even if I say, even if it's still a market economy, yes, it still greatly prevents people from cheating, because everyone already recognizes scammers in them and simply does not deal with them. Therefore, no one will give guarantees, but they stop some things from fraud and from achieving the interests of only one group of persons, without taking into account the interests of their partners. So no. How, in a direct democracy, to ensure the adoption of necessary but unpopular decisions? By the way, I don't understand what is necessary but unpopular. This is a figure of speech by which people are persuaded to accept what is not beneficial to them but beneficial to someone else. That's what is necessary but unpopular. That is, it is not necessary. It is exactly that unpopular which is given out as necessary. Therefore, there is no way to provide, because on the contrary, it is necessary to ensure that such things are never implemented. The all-Russian nuclear power plant was built in Uryupinsk. In Uryupinsk, I decided to introduce troops, but Uryupinsk cannot separate together with the ANP if it is in collective use. Even if they became independent on their own, the O remained in collective use anyway. It doesn't matter who, well, what status they have established for themselves, but they can't take the property with them. That is, in any case, yes, it stands on their territory, but, since it is public property from the very beginning, it remains common, and this does not mean that they are deprived of the right to receive electricity from her, and everyone else retains it. No, it's just that both retain the right to use it in the same proportion, and jointly manage it. And in all other matters, yes, they are independent, with which they do not overlap. Well, the same thing. If a railway passes through them, they have separated. The railway still remains in common use. And everything else, well, dispose of yourself. It's enough to save the functioning of this, and everything else is fine. How to determine which issues who decides? Well, I said that first voting on the powers, naturally then the country will vote on each issue. No, well, of course not for everyone, so you can endlessly, by question groups. That is, it says everything that relates, I do not know, to the design of the inner entrance, the residents of the entrance decide. If we need to make some kind of exception, well, I do not know. There is a gas pipe passing through, which somehow extends to the whole house. It is negotiated separately, except for this, except for the gas pipe and something else. Everything else, please, is your right, do what you want. Well, and also for everything else. In other words, it's easier to say that the whole group of issues is solved locally, but as locally as possible, yes, from all possible levels, and as an exception, say those that are solved globally, because there are fewer of them all the time. In other words, We have, I do not know, a network of railways there. This is a kind of global thing. Well, because as a rule they still go a long distance. If we say highways, for example, inside a city, and it does not need to be made global, we can leave the highway global, but inside the city, let the city decide, it will be better this way. But it goes straight in blocks. It is better every time a question arises on this particular issue, to hold another vote, quickly decide from what level, well, at what level it is decided, and then follow it. And at the first stage, it's just a kind of global distribution to determine in general terms. A person who tells everyone how wonderful Annan is gets more weight with a system with moral voices. And you are smart, wonderful, of course. Everyone will practically say to himself that he is smart and wonderful in conditions when he really will be offered this. That is, some will be modest and say not, well, there is no need. As soon as they are offered, they will say yes, of course, I know better than anyone, I have watched it a million times. Why don't you concede on Radio Aurora? I don't even know who it is. If these are the people to whom a person came, telling about why Americans did not fly to the moon, I can even answer why I'm not performing there, but mostly, I just don't even know who, no one called me. Donato's not displayed on the screen and relate to the topic, but I'll say here, yes, in theory they should be displayed, now I'll check, but they are derived from only one source. No, they should be displayed. If it is not output, Figs knows why. The chat, by the way, also turned off for some reason. I don't know, everything is broken, nothing works. The donators are output only from the lurk data, the rest is unclear how to connect. Well, if all people really want to, I can sort it out and configure it, but really they don't send that much. So, how a planned economy will work in a direct democracy. In the next part, there will be, that is, I have prepared some considerations just from the side of direct democracy towards a planned economy. And in theory, in the story about the planned economy, it will also be only already as if in the opposite direction, right? What bonuses it gets in direct democracy. But the point is that these principles continue to be preserved. In other words, the decision is still made by the team, the budgets are kept. The collective distributes budgets internally, and the only thing that comes from the side of this planning body, in quotes, is actually something like an order from society. In other words, the economy plan in this regard, it allows you to automate orders from society. That is, to collect information from it and transmit it to those who are engaged in production. But this is a short answer, there it is longer, if you tell it in detail. But something like this, but this is a planning body, it is not the one who dictates to someone what to do. A planning body is one that finds a certain correct answer, and how to implement this correct answer later, how to convince there is already another more complex system, but it exists within the framework of direct democracy. That is, it is not someone who orders it. This is exactly the scheme of how to make sure that everyone performs, but voluntarily. So now, what happens to the voting on each particular fence? All those who were not supposed to vote under the new scheme will have their votes annulled. I didn't understand how they are cancelled. They are simply not there among those who can vote on this issue. Why cancel them? That is, only those people who are in this chat can write in this chat now. If I turn on the invitation-only login now, no one will be able to write to it without an invitation. In other words, nothing additional needs to be done for this. The same thing happens there. The option of direct democracy without general suffrage was discussed. With a simple exam to the right voice, then the same thing. Then he will conduct an exam. He will select people who are convenient for him to vote, since there is no way to check. Well, you can't objectively say who to give rights to, who can't. Well, not exactly. There is no such possibility for a more or less normal person. That is, we can understand that a person whose level of development is like a dog, for some medical reasons, is innate. Yes, he probably can't cope with it. But what's interesting here is that, even if we give him the right to vote like that, they will not affect the situation in any way. There are few of them. That is, even if they randomly press the button there every time, well, okay, there are 1,000th of the entire population there. And since they randomly press, they also mutually destroy their own voices. In other words, you don't have to worry about it at all. You can even give mentally retarded people in a coma the right to vote there. But the only problem is that something else can vote for them. That's where the problem appears. And this is the only reason why it may not be necessary to give them this voice, because they will not be themselves. But someone will use their voice. But if we had the opportunity to guarantee that they vote themselves, without any questions at all, we gave it to everyone. We can give it to domestic dogs if we make sure that it is the dog who will vote. It won't affect in any way. It's purely for statistical reasons. And any approach about exams is always a question of usurpation of power. In other words, this is a way to justify the usurpation of power in favor of me personally, the one who will take the exams. Is it possible not to have democracy in production? Yes, of course. In other words, it is not just possible. In production, exactly the same as I said about government agencies. I don't remember how accurately I said about production there. But the point is that what I was talking about, it applies to all organizations in general. In other words, it's not just government agencies. This is any enterprise. It works exactly according to the same principles. In other words, there is no chief, even an elected one. There is direct democracy everywhere. Those roles some meaningful roles that are now played by some people with a name, such as there is a president, chairman of the board of directors. They are saved. But these people are not bosses, but employees. That is, it is necessary that someone, well, I do not know, keep records in the backtracker. Well, this is how we get a tank tracker coordinator. That is, he does not order anyone. He collects the information that we received and gives it out here. You can vote on it, make a decision. So it is in any area, there with a budget, with anything, including the budget of the enterprise. Moreover, my friend checked exactly what he checked at his private firm. It concerned mainly the budget. That is, first of all, he began to announce the budget openly, well, to all employees, and agree with them on how to distribute it. That is, it definitely works. He had doubts about other things there, but he definitely said about this that he was working. Who formulates the question itself, which is put to the vote, and the options for answering it. That is, any person takes and formulates, and gives his options in the simplest case, yes or no. But the engine itself supports the option. Well, something like to add your own version. In other words, the voter does not necessarily have to choose from these two. He can add his own, and vote for him, and in turn, promote him. If the engine does not support this, but it will have to agitate everyone to vote no, and in parallel start another vote, where this option is available. Well, also with a yes or no question, but it's just more steps, in my opinion. It's so inconvenient, but in any case, it's anyone who has the right to make a decision at this level. He can also make a question. Well, that is clear. I can't make a vote while living in Moscow. It's about what color to paint houses in Vladivostok. I can't do this, but any resident of Vladivostok can, well, at least if it relates to the city level, he can do it. The most popular answer depends on the correct formulation of the question, of course, but anyone has the opportunity to write their own thoughts. That is, it is quite possible to say that it is formulated here somehow very vaguely. Let's reformulate my version of the question. So this is also an option, right? Let's reformulate the question itself. Maybe this option is really unsuccessful. Will win. Let's reformulate. Someone will do this, and there will no longer win. The option let's reformulate. In other words, the majority will consider it correct. Teach logic and law from school. On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, no. Here, I was looking at Soviet textbooks on logic. I didn't like it. Although for some reason, many people are trying to advertise them, like, there were times. I didn't like it. I wouldn't teach such on such. And then, yes, there is also the question of how to teach, according to what methodology. But it's better to discuss about. Make the stream about education specific. There are also a lot of considerations that are not right. That is, it may or may not help. How to teach? It may even worsen. It is unknown. After all, deputies do not compose laws themselves today. Special lawyers prepare them for them. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Some write themselves. It's some kind of myth that there are some groups of professionals that I develop there. I'm already saying, it's not enough that we can't say for sure about professionals whether it's a professional. Even if we could say it, it's not necessarily true. That is, a person can write, for example, the whole law himself, and immediately propose it. No one can forbid him. He cannot be banned from doing so in any parliament in the world. So I wanted to and did it. Someone can write the whole law and ask a lawyer friend to check, say if there are any obvious miscalculations there. And, in 2 places, on his advice, he will correct himself again. But there is also a nuance, why it should not be like this in principle, because if the law is clear only to a lawyer, it is generally useless. In other words, the law should be clear to any idiot. And therefore, it is not only unnecessary to strive for this law to be drawn up by a lawyer in a legal language, but it is necessary to strive for the opposite. That is, even if the law was written by a lawyer, it is necessary that someone translated it all into the language that he would raise to everyone. Otherwise, no one will consciously observe this law. Yes, it will just be a stick that you can hit someone with at any moment. He will not play his role as a law. The same as there is no point in doing such volumes there with a code of laws. Even if all the laws cannot be read even by lawyers, consider that they do not exist. In other words, this is also a stick that you can hit someone on the head just at the will of those in power. In other words, the law should really be a very small book, written in very simple language. Everything is as clear as possible there, without special terminology. But fortunately, in many places it is already so. That is, they are not the legal language themselves. This is in some places, where in the USA, for example, there is depressive law. Yes, it can be written there in such a way that no one will understand at all, and even lawyers will argue what was meant here. And there are just a lot of such precedents when people really argue in court about the interpretation of a precedent, or about the interpretation of some law that was adopted there 100 or 500 years ago, and no one understands what it's about. But in theory, this should not be done. Won't there be too much power then, meaning lawyers? Of course it will. In other words, this is an additional minus, that if a person writes in a language that only he understands, he can always push through some bullshit, and the one to whom he proposed to promote this case, he won't even understand what it's about. Not because the topic itself is complicated, but because the text itself is deliberately confusing. In other words, the most difficult things can really be explained in a very short time if you use normal language. And at the same time, the simplest things or even complete absurdity can be disguised with the help of a specially overcomplicated language under something that a lot of people will seem completely incomprehensible to them on the one hand, and on the other hand, it seems to be very smart. Although it will not be smart, it will really continue to remain incomprehensible. And if not one side, but two, they argue the wording and so on. How to decide or vote for universal formulations? Well, yes, in fact, a vote for the wording. But it usually doesn't happen that easily. That is, usually everything. Well, as if a person would not specifically formulate it like this. There are people with such mental disorders who do this, there are scammers, but usually, if a person wants to honestly promote his law, well, or some kind of concept, he tries to explain everything as unambiguously and clearly as possible. Simply because otherwise, he will not gather votes under it. Because people will read, and will say I don't understand what is written here at all, I vote for incomprehensible. Therefore, they will not even have to argue with each other much. They can offer each their own option, if they agree in principle that these options are about the same thing, but do not agree which one is better. They can both post behind their signature that we who proposed these options, we agree that they are about the same thing. Maybe it's a bunch of people, it will be enough. They will say yes, we also think it's about the same thing, the vote will be the same. Well, in my opinion, it's just not the right thing, with which it is necessary to bother, because with the same success you can say, but in the Duma they will sort it out. There too, someone can write something that no one understands, and others will say, let's reformulate. It happens all the time. But somehow they solve it. On the contrary, they solve it, in my opinion, too effectively. Judging by the fact that there is such a special name for them, mad printer, it would be better if they spent most of the time searching for suitable formulations, not publishing 3 laws a day there. So now, did you miss the report, or didn't you miss it? Will any questions be left to specialists? For example, the Russian Academy of Sciences has allocated budgets. There are only academics who decide to spend it on. No, the questions that are given in quotation marks to specialists at the mercy, they are those that relate to the functioning of the organization, and not the contacts of the organization with the outside world. This is the question that is given to the employees of this organization. But it is given to all employees, from the academician to the cleaners. They can still divide further. Well, let's say to say that some questions do not apply to cleaners, relationships do not affect them in any way. Let's do it without cleaners. But in any case, it can't be as if it's 1 or 2 people. That is, 1 or 2 people can only decide what is their personal choice. It refers to their personal interaction. And one person can decide, well, I do not know how to move around the apartment there, what clothes to wear at home. That's what he decides for himself. And otherwise, well, everyone is involved. They decide. If it's a budget, the cleaner is also in the subject. In other words, they also take part in the budget discussion. And some more private things, like there is some kind of installation to operate, but if the cleaner does not operate it, she does not participate in it. So now I accidentally squandered too far down. In fact, the law is put forward and formulated by an initiative group of people. Well, actually yes, which is interested in it. Again, actually yes. Fitting. Then it says you need a fitting for legal registration. No, it's not necessary. But they can ask anyone. That is, if they have some kind of perfectionism, they can ask someone for advice before publishing. This is their right. It's still impossible to check, because we have no way to distinguish a real lawyer from a non-real one. But everyone has the right to consult with anyone. Hawthorne writes here, then, the one who drowns the flat earth, he worries me about it. Although, too, probably, if you are sane, you can talk about the land, I don't mind. It may even be interesting. I would like to learn a little more about the rules of refusal from deprivation at any moment. For example, the people of country A voted for the declaration of war in country B. War has been declared, but without the consent of C, it can no longer be ended. Generally speaking, it can. In other words, this is not some kind of discrete state. Yes, this is if we have already bombed it, then yes, we probably will have to negotiate with them somehow. But now it's real, if someone sends someone some kind of scribble that says we declare war on you, it doesn't mean that nuclear bombs will fly right away. People will first check before a fig of time and whether they really announced it. You never know, maybe some crazy clerk sent this message. It's not like the president personally went with this. Yes, it's something that has come, or someone has said something, or a person posing as a stock has announced it. That is, in reality, if the fighting is not even, as a rule, there is always an opportunity to stop. And another country, if it has no reason to participate in the war without starting hostilities, it can begin mobilization or some such measures, but it is unlikely, if it itself has no desire to start a war, it is unlikely that it will do anything. On the other hand, she has such a desire, she can start doing it without declaring war. That is, there are none, and negotiations can be started at any time. That is, as a rule, it is. Well, it's like a very flexible thing. That is, there have been wars that were really divided for 2 days and nothing somehow stopped. Someone decided that he immediately lost, or decided that a mistake had occurred. In other words, there is no problem. This is exactly where the ardent desire of both sides to participate is needed. And not only that, but also people, the population of the country, should support it, because otherwise the Tsar wants it there. But people don't want it, and there will be big problems with mobilization, with fighting in general, because the majority is against it. That is why, before each war, the population begins to wind up, to cultivate their hatred of the enemy there. And this is not a very fast process. You can't do that there in one day. Even mobilization, it can be an occupation for months. What is your opinion about the Chinese experiment on social capital? Well, listen, there are a lot of experiments in general, not that the Chinese did it. In other words, there is no need to think that capitalism is an absolute evil in general, in any form. It's just that it doesn't give a millimeter to all other people, except for big capitalism. In other words, there are a lot of very successful solutions, even under formal capitalism. Under socialism, it is possible to do this better, yes, but especially in countries like Switzerland, there are a lot of great finds, although formally they have capitalism. But, at the expense of democracy, it is capitalism, which is much more under the control of the population than the economy of the Soviet Union, for example, was under the control of the population, despite the declared socialism. You had some thoughts in radiology, national ideas, and so on, under direct democracy. Here I don't understand the question. If the question is about whether they can be there, they can. In other words, people have the right to think what they want, and even tell what they want. They have the right. That is, again, since this is a direct democracy, the entire population can gather and ban some ideology by a majority vote, but in my opinion, it is not necessary to do so. And this is the general rule of democracy. The general rule of democracy is not the prohibition of any ideologies. Well, there's still yes. The question is again about weights. And what if the weights are automatically calculated? There is nothing automatic, because we cannot attach a program that addresses the universal information field, which objectively knows everything about everything. In other words, any program, any automation, is some kind of algorithm. The algorithm is developed by a person. Or, if you like, the algorithm can develop some kind of complete artificial intelligence, but in this sense, it is also no different from a person. And the fact that the opinion of the algorithm developers will coincide with the opinion of the majority of the population is absolutely not necessary. Therefore, in any case, the advantage goes to the one who made this algorithm, who controls it, in general, owns the system itself, which distributes the weights. He or she seems to have special powers, and very quickly it turns out that for some reason, the algorithm on the voting history particularly highly evaluates his best friends and colleagues, and for some reason the rest lose. Especially when they start arguing with him. This is where their weight on the objective algorithm begins to decrease to negative values. So in this way, the problem is eliminated over time. Then it is not liquidated. So most of the questions, well, not most, a fair part of the questions, do not have an objectively correct answer at all. So in principle, we cannot find out the person answered it correctly. The correct answers to them are the one that the majority chose. It's in physics that we can, well, build some kind of model, test it on experiments, and say it works like this. These are the areas of descriptive judgments. When we describe the observable world, we can test them. When we are in the field of target judgments. In other words, I want the fence to be painted in this color. There is no way we can verify this because there is no objective answer to this question. I want it, and I want to eat it. That's how the majority decided, and it's right.